Sweyn Forkbeard is remembered to history as one of the fiercest Viking kings who ever lived, carving out an empire, becoming the king of Denmark, Norway and England. He would forge a vast kingdom. His early years are shrouded in mythic grandeur, marked by his induction into the illustrious Order of the Joms Vikings, a formidable band of warrior mercenaries, renowned for their martial prowess. Under the tutelage of the Order's founder Palnatoke, a legendary Viking figure celebrated in the sagas for his unparalleled mastery of combat, Sweyn honed his skills and forged his destiny. His restless ambition knew no bounds, and as a young man, he boldly seized the throne of Denmark from his own father, establishing his authority with an iron fist. His quest for power did not end there. Sweyn proved his mettle in the greatest naval battle of the Viking Age, the Battle of Svolder. In this epic confrontation, he vanquished the King of Norway, Olaf Tryggvason, and claimed dominion over Norway, cementing his reputation as a master strategist and fearsome warrior. In the twilight of his life, Sweyn turned his relentless ambition towards England, a land ripe for conquest. With fire and sword, he unleashed a ferocious campaign, culminating in the subjugation of the English throne. Sweyn Forkbeard's legacy is one of unyielding resolve, a king who truly embodied the Viking warrior spirit. He would forever live on through song and saga. According to Adam of Bremen, Sweyn was the last of the pagan kings of Denmark, believing in the old gods that can be seen in Germanic paganism. However, Emma Zirconium reports, Sweyn was the most fortunate of all the kings in his time, and the government of the empire which he administered brought him great worldly honour. Sweyn achieved every Viking's dream, becoming the king of the Northern Realm and England. But he would die after just 5 weeks on the English throne, at the age of 50. His brilliance is what held his empire together, and upon his demise, it collapsed. However, he laid the blueprint for his son Canute the Great, to take his glory and unite his empire once more. This is the story of Sweyn Forkbeard. Sweyn entered the world in the year 963, born into a lineage steeped in legend. His father, Harald Bluetooth, heralded a new era as the first Christian king of Denmark, ushering in a time of profound transformation. Under Harald's reign, the kingdom once dominated by ancient Norse gods began to embrace Christianity, a shift that stirred deep currents within the hearts and minds of the people. This new faith was at odds with the traditional pagan beliefs that had long defined their identity and culture. Therefore, Sweyn's upbringing was marred by the contrasting legacies of his father and grandfather. His grandfather, Gorm the Old, had been a fanatical defender of the old ways, opposed to the tide of Christianity. Gorm's hostility towards the new religion was legendary. He sought to obliterate it from his realm, reportedly torturing priests and persecuting Christian converts with unrelenting cruelty. In stark contrast, Harald Bluetooth chose to forsake the old gods and convert to Christianity, thus altering the course of Danish history. Sweyn grew up in a land where the once mighty Norse gods of his ancestors, once invoked in battle and celebrated in epic sagas, were receding into obscurity. The ancient deities, renowned for their tales of valour and divine intervention, were being supplanted by the Christian god. Pagan temples were torn down, and Christian churches erected atop their ruins. Sweyn's lineage further anchored him in the storied past of the Vikings, as the grandson of Gorm the Old, who himself was the grandson of the legendary Sigurd Snake in the Eye. Sweyn was a direct male descendant of the renowned Ragnar Lothbrok, a Viking hero celebrated in both legend and history. Ragnar, often regarded as a descendant of Odin, imbued Sweyn's family with a sense of divine right to rule, linking their authority to the gods of old. This divine ancestry added a sacred dimension to Sweyn's lineage, marking his family's rule as both heroic and otherworldly. Sweyn's father diminished this sacred element of their kingship the moment he became a Christian, and this would have a huge effect on Sweyn, as according to some sources, he championed the religion of his forefathers over Christianity. According to the Viking saga, Sweyn was raised by Palnatoke, the formidable chieftain of the Vikings, a legendary and elite order of Viking warriors, renowned throughout the north. Palnatoke, a devout adherent to the old pagan faith, likely played a significant role in shaping the young Sweyn's beliefs and values. The tradition among Danish nobility was to send their sons into the care of another jarl or lord, a practice intended to broaden their horizons and impart the true nature of the world. In Palnatoke's care, Sweyn would have been immersed in the lore and traditions of his ancestors, honing his skills with swords and axes, fortifying his spirit in preparation for the great destiny that awaited him. In the days of Sweyn's youth, when he reached the age of 15, his foster father Palnatoke counselled him to approach his father King Harald and request a contingent of men. Sweyn heeded this advice and approached his father with a bold demand, as recounted in the Viking saga. Sweyn would boldly march into his father's court, and the young prince's audacity would anger the king. Sweyn said, "Grant me 3 ships, and my foster father will provide another 3. If you refuse, I will inflict harm upon you that will leave a lasting mark." The king, with a cold gaze, responded, "I think you can be bought off this way. Never come back." Thus, Harald reluctantly gave Sweyn 3 ships and a crew of 120 men. These words hinted at a deeper estrangement, foreshadowing Sweyn's exile from his father's court, as their relationship had long been marred by conflict. Throughout that summer, Sweyn unleashed his fury upon his father's kingdom, forging his reputation as a fearsome Viking. He burned villages, plundered wealth, and carved his name into the annals of history with fire and blood, becoming a figure of dread among the kingdom's people. As the snows melted and the spring arrived, Sweyn returned from his exile, bold and unyielding. He again stormed into his father's court, this time demanding 12 ships. The king, wearied by his son's defiance, declared, "I shall never accept you as my son." Fury blazed in Sweyn's eyes as he retorted, "I am your son, and if you deny me what I seek, we shall settle this here and now. You will have no chance of escaping." With these words, Sweyn challenged his father to Holmgang, a sacred duel that few dare invoke. The tension in the hall was palpable, the air thick with anticipation. Yet King Harald, recognizing the unyielding spirit within his son, conceded, "You are a difficult man to deal with, and possess a brave spirit. You shall have what you demand, but once you leave, never return." Sweyn returned to the formidable stronghold of Jomsborg, where his foster father Palnatoke resided. Palnatoke welcomed him with open arms, fostering the young prince's rebellious and restless nature. Sweyn's defiance and insatiable thirst for power were the hallmarks of his youth, traits that would soon fuel a treacherous plot. Adam of Bremen states this: "In Sweyn's youth, he lived among heathens and was a rebellious pagan who persecuted Christians and betrayed his father." In the shadows of Jomsborg's walls, Sweyn and Palnatoke hatched a plan to overthrow King Harald. They conspired to unite their forces and challenge the aging monarch's rule. Palnatoke, with his formidable band of Vikings, began recruiting more warriors, while Sweyn embarked on a campaign of terror across Denmark. The young prince ravaged the countryside, setting fires and looting with a relentless fury. The terrified villagers fled before him, carrying tales of destruction and rebellion to the king's ear. Enraged by his son's unrelenting defiance, King Harald finally resolved to confront Sweyn. He assembled a fleet, where a civil war between father and son would begin. Adam of Bremen chronicles these tumultuous events, painting a vivid picture of the chaos that ensued. The son of the great Harald, king of the Danes, set in motion many plots against his father, taking counsel with those whom Harald had compelled to embrace Christianity against their will. Together, they schemed to strip the king of his throne, exploiting his advanced age and waning strength. The Danes, in a sudden and united rebellion, conspired to renounce Christianity and elevate Sweyn as their king and wage war against Harald. This account underscores Sweyn's allegiance to the old pagan ways, a faith perhaps rekindled and upheld by Palnatoke, a staunch believer in the ancient gods. Palnatoke's influence on Sweyn was profound, nurturing a defiant spirit that would stop at nothing to reclaim a kingdom lost to the encroaching tide of Christianity. The stage was set for a clash of titanic forces, with the fate of Denmark hanging in the balance. According to the Viking saga, King Harald, with a fleet of 50 ships, set out in pursuit of his rebellious son. As dusk settled, the two fleets met, but the lateness of the hour made the battle unfeasible. The night passed in tense anticipation, with both sides preparing for the inevitable confrontation at dawn. As the sun rose, the ships grappled together, and a bloody battle ensued. On one side stood Sweyn, a fierce young Viking prince, his restless spirit undeterred by the odds. On the other, Harald, the now Christian king of Denmark, determined to quell the rebellion. By nightfall, the sea was stained with blood, and the toll of death was heavy. 10 of Harald's ships and 12 of Sweyn's had been captured. Sweyn's fleet, seeking refuge, anchored at the bottom of the creek, only to find their escape route blocked by Harald's strategically positioned ships. That evening, Palnatoke, the leader of the Vikings, arrived with 24 ships, anchoring on the opposite side of the headland. Setting up camp, Palnatoke stealthily went ashore and armed himself with his bow and quiver. As night fell, Palnatoke would spot a fire. King Harald and his men had landed and were warming themselves by the flames. Recognizing the king, Palnatoke notched an arrow and with deadly precision shot Harald through the heart, killing him instantly. He swiftly retreated to his ship, gathering his Vikings for counsel. The gravity of kingslaying, an act of regicide, was not lost on them. One voice among them suggested, "My advice is that we all stick to the same story. The king was shot in battle." They swore oaths to uphold this pact. The next morning, Palnatoke approached Sweyn, but withheld the news of his father's demise. Instead, he proposed an attack on Harald's fleet, despite knowing the king was already dead. The assault was executed with brutal efficiency, capsizing 3 enemy ships and cutting down countless warriors. The next day, the royal fleet discovered the truth of Harald's death. Faced with the reality, Palnatoke offered them a stark choice: fight or acknowledge Sweyn as their new king. The royal army, demoralized and leaderless, surrendered. In the aftermath, Palnatoke and Sweyn convened a royal assembly, where the nobility and warriors unanimously voted for Sweyn as the new king of Denmark. Thus, the young prince, once a rebellious exile, ascended to the throne, his rise marked by bloodshed and treachery, but also the unwavering support of the loyal Jom's Vikings. Adam of Bremen recounts that Harald succumbed to his wounds after fleeing the battlefield. Emma Zirconium further illuminates the conflict, portraying Sweyn as a young prince whose popularity stirred jealousy in his father, King Harald. Fearful of being overshadowed, Harald sought to expel Sweyn from the kingdom and strip him of the right of his succession. Yet, the loyalty of the army lay with Sweyn, and they rallied behind him. A fierce battle ensued, forcing Harald to retreat grievously wounded to the land of the Slavs, where he soon met his demise. This left Sweyn in unchallenged possession of the throne, his ascent seemingly ordained by the will of the warriors. While still a young man, Sweyn, the now King of Denmark, would honour the memory of his late father Harald Bluetooth, and organised a grand funeral feast, a majestic gathering filled with solemn rites and revelry. However, during the festivities, a dark revelation ruined the proceedings. Sweyn discovered that Palnatoke, who had once been his mentor, was responsible for his father's death and had concealed the grievous act from him. Consumed by fury and betrayal, Sweyn immediately ordered his men to seize and kill Palnatoke. Yet, the seasoned warrior drew his sword in an instant and slew the king's guards who dare approach him. The hall fell silent, the air thick with tension, as no other man dared to challenge Palnatoke, paralysed by the awe and respect his presence commanded. Humiliated and powerless, Sweyn could do nothing as his former foster father, the legendary warrior, turned his back on the throne and walked away. The old warrior departed, rowing away into the mist, leaving a stinging wound on the young king's pride. According to the sagas, Sweyn never saw Palnatoke again, the memory of that fateful night forever haunting him, as a reminder of the complex web of loyalty and treachery that defined his ascent to power. In the year 994, Sweyn Forkbeard re-emerges in the annals of history, his name appearing in the chronicles of John of Worcester. His gaze and ambition would turn towards the rich kingdom of England, a land his people had plundered for generations. Now a seasoned king of the age of 30, Sweyn, alongside Olaf Tryggvason, a descendant of Harald Fairhair, led a formidable fleet of 94 galleys to the gates of London. On the feast day of St. Mary on September the 8th, the two men launched a fierce assault on the city, attempting to breach its walls and set it ablaze. However, the city's defenders repelled the attackers, inflicting significant losses upon them. Undeterred and seething with rage, Sweyn and Olaf withdrew from London, directing their fury toward the surrounding regions. Their wrath descended upon the coasts of Essex and Kent, spreading like wildfire to Sussex. The chronicle describes the horror of their campaign. They left a trail of devastation. Villages were burned, lands were ravaged, and countless lives were extinguished without mercy. The Viking forces, relentless in their savagery, showed no compassion, slaying men, women, and children alike. In the face of this unchecked violence, King Ethelred, counselled by his nobles, sought a desperate resolution. He sent envoys to the marauding Vikings, offering them tribute and regular payments in exchange for an end to their barbarities. Sweyn and Olaf, perhaps swayed by the promise of wealth, agreed to the terms. The Vikings withdrew their ships and assembled their forces at Southampton, where they chose to winter. The tribute, a hefty sum of £16,000 in gold and silver, was raised from across England, with Wessex bearing the brunt of the cost. Thus, a fragile peace was bought, the land once more at the mercy of the unpredictable tides of fortune and power. As Sweyn amassed wealth and governed Denmark with an iron fist, his old comrade Olaf Tryggvason ascended to the throne of Norway. Before his ascension, Hakon Sigurdsson, the Jarl of Lade, sometimes called Hakon the Powerful, and reputedly descended from giants, or perhaps even the legendary Ivar the Boneless, rose to become the most influential man in Norway, serving as its regent. Initially, Hakon was supported by Harald Bluetooth of Denmark, to whom he paid tribute. However, their alliance soured over religious disputes. Harald, a recent convert to Christianity, was determined to spread the new faith throughout Norway, while Hakon steadfastly clung to the old gods. The tension would culminate in an epic battle, where Hakon emerged victorious, maintaining his pagan beliefs. After Harald's death, Sweyn, who was more tolerant of paganism, possibly even a pagan himself, chose not to impose Christian rule on Norway. He allowed the region to maintain its ancient religious customs, particularly in an area known as the Viking in southeastern Norway, which at the time was a Danish province under his governance. In the year 995, the balance of power shifted dramatically when Hakon the Powerful was deposed and killed by Olaf Tryggvason, who would seize the throne. Though Olaf and Sweyn had once stood as allies, Olaf rejected Sweyn's rule in the Viking, and under his Christian banner, embarked on a zealous mission to convert Norway and its western colonies. With a mix of threats, torture, and executions, Olaf crushed pagan resistance, transforming Norway into a Christian nation, at least in name, within a few short years. This marked a significant turning point in the region's religious landscape, as the ancient Norse ways were forcibly replaced by the new Christian order. Thus, a deep enmity brewed between Sweyn Forkbeard and Olaf Tryggvason, as Sweyn had lost the Viking, which had long been Danish territory. According to the Icelandic historian Odda Snorrason, this animosity was further kindled when Sweyn's sister Tura of Denmark defiantly married Olaf Tryggvason against her brother's wishes. This union was a source of great displeasure for Sweyn, who in response would refuse to pay the dowry that had been promised to his sister. Determined to bring down Olaf, Sweyn conspired with Jarl Sigvaldi, the successor of Palnatoke and the current commander of the Joms Vikings. Together with the King of Sweden, they devised a cunning plan to lure Olaf Tryggvason into a deadly trap. Sweyn also secured the support of Eric and Sweyn Hakonsson, the sons of Hakon the Powerful. They were the new Earls of Lade and rulers of much of northern Norway. With these formidable allies at his side, Sweyn's position was immensely strong. The coalition of powerhouses poised him for a monumental clash, setting the stage for a dramatic confrontation with Olaf Tryggvason. The fateful battle was said to have taken place at the turn of the millennium, in the year 1000. The saga of Olaf Tryggvason recounts the events in vivid detail, providing a chronicle of treachery and cunning. According to its annals, this is how the events unfolded. When King Sweyn mustered his fleet, he dispatched Earl Sigvaldi, the chief of the Joms Vikings, to Wendland with a mission to spy on King Olaf's movements and orchestrate a trap that would ensure their paths crossed. Earl Sigvaldi, a shrewd and calculating man, made his way to Wendland and Jomsborg, where he met with King Olaf Tryggvason. Their conversations were cordial, and the Earl endeared himself to the king, rekindling a bond rooted in their past kinship. Sigvaldi, ever the strategist, devised numerous pretexts to delay Olaf's departure westward, allowing time for Sweyn's armies to unite. This frustrated Olaf's men, who were eager to set sail, as the fair winds and clear skies called them to battle. Meanwhile, Sigvaldi secretly learned that King Sweyn of Denmark, the King of Sweden, and Earl Eric of Lade had joined forces, and were preparing to ambush King Olaf off the coast of Wendland, near the island of Svold. Rumours spread throughout Wendland that King Sweyn had mobilised a formidable host, with whispers suggesting Sweyn eagerly awaited a confrontation with King Olaf. Sigvaldi reassured Olaf, suggesting Sweyn would not dare attack with the Danish fleet alone, considering the strength of Olaf's forces and his Jomsviking host. Sigvaldi would accompany Olaf with his own contingent of Jomsviking warriors, renowned for their prowess in battle. He said, "I will sail with you, with 11 well-equipped ships." Olaf agreed to this proposal, and with a favourable breeze blowing, he commanded his fleet to set sail. The horns sounded, and the sails were hoisted as the fleet embarked. The smaller ships surged ahead, outpacing the rest as they made for the open sea. Sigvaldi kept his vessels close to the king's flagship, advising Olaf to follow him closely, as he claimed to know the safest and deepest channels between the islands. With Sigvaldi's 11 ships leading the way, Olaf's 11 large ships followed, while the rest of the fleet sailed ahead into the open waters. As they approached the island of Svold, a small lifeboat approached, its crew informing Sigvaldi that King Sweyn's fleet lay in wait just ahead. With this knowledge, Sigvaldi ordered the sails to be lowered, and they rowed under the cover of the island. Thus, the trap was set, and the stage was prepared for one of the most legendary confrontations in Viking history. As the sails of Sigvaldi's fleet appeared on the horizon, a murmur spread through the allied ranks of Sweyn. One ship in the enemy fleet stood out among the rest, a grand vessel of unrivaled size. King Sweyn pointed and declared, "There sails the Long Serpent." This ship was renowned as the largest and most magnificent vessel ever constructed during the Viking Age, adorned with gold, a symbol of Olaf's power and prestige. Yet, amidst the growing tension, Earl Eric Hakonsson counselled restraint. "Many fine ships sail with them," he cautioned, "and we must wait." His words were met with a chorus of discontent, as warriors whispered of honour and vengeance. "Will Earl Eric the Earl not avenge his father?" they muttered, their voices tinged with frustration. The memory of their fallen lord Hakon the Powerful fueled their desire for retribution. The prospect of allowing King Olaf to pass unchallenged was an affront to their pride, a stain upon their honour. Sigvaldi and his Jomsvikings had fulfilled their treacherous role, luring the King of Norway into a waiting trap. As they prepared to withdraw, having played their part, the tension among the allies reached its peak. King Sweyn was roused into action by the sight of his foe and the cries of his men, and he stood tall and declared, "This evening the serpent shall rise high, and I shall steer her myself." His proclamation was met with a resounding cheer, a roar that echoed across the waves. The warriors, fueled by the promise of glory and revenge, hastened for battle. The pact was clear. King Sweyn, the King of the Swedes, and Earl Eric of Lade had resolved to divide Norway among themselves should they succeed in slaying Olaf Tryggvason. The spoils of war would belong to the one who first boarded the Norse king's ship, the Long Serpent, while each leader would lay claim to the vessels they cleared. Yet, they all knew this would not be an easy conquest. The Long Serpent was a colossal warship, the tallest and largest in the North Sea. Its towering structure allowed Olaf's men to unleash a deadly hail of arrows, javelins, and other missiles from above, turning the ship into an impregnable floating fortress. Sweyn and his army would have to fight from lower ships, so they faced a formidable challenge. As the fleets closed in for battle, King Sweyn's ship surged forward, setting the stage for a bloody encounter with the infamous Long Serpent. The King of the Swedes and Erik Håkonsson skillfully manoeuvred their vessels into position, their crews bracing for a brutal clash. Olaf's fleet found itself besieged by a relentless storm of violence, the shouts of the warriors mingling with the dying cries of the fallen. Ship after ship of Olaf's fleet fell under the crushing weight of the enemy's assault. Desperate sailors leapt into the freezing waters, choosing the uncertain mercy of the sea over the certainty of death at the hands of Sweyn's marauding warriors. Yet, the Danes faced a formidable opponent in Olaf Tryggvason, who stood defiant aboard the mighty Long Serpent, the grandest Viking ship ever crafted. Sweyn fought with a trance-like fury, his eyes blazing as he clashed with the Norsemen. Despite his ferocity, the towering vessel and its defenders proved a daunting challenge, repelling every assault with grim determination. For hours, the sea ran red with blood, the waters churning with the dead and dying. At last, only the Long Serpent stood, a lone fortress amidst the wreckage of battle. The sagas tell of Erik Håkonsson, who emerged as the battle's hero. He stood tall on the prow of his ship, shielded by a wall of interlocked shields, his men fighting with the fury of the berserkers. Swords, spears, and axes clashed against the defenders, but arrows and javelins rained down from above. Erik, undeterred by the storm of violence, led his warriors with unyielding resolve, their war cries echoing across the sea. The Long Serpent became a symbol of defiance and resilience, its defenders' last stand a saga of heroism and tragedy. Driven to madness by the fury of the battle, Olaf's warriors climbed onto the ramparts of their ship, desperate to engage their foes in close combat. Their swords flashed as they sought to cut down any enemy who dare approach. But many of their opponents wisely kept a distance. In their rage, some of Olaf's men, forgetting they were not on solid ground, lost their balance and tumbled overboard, sinking beneath the waves, their weapons dragging them down into the cold depths of the sea. The battle was a blood-soaked melee, a brutal struggle for supremacy. As weapons clashed and bodies fell, the waters around the Long Serpent turned red with the blood of the fallen. Erik Håkonsson seized this opportunity. With an iron determination, he led his men in a daring assault, boarding the Long Serpent as the 15th man to climb aboard. As the battle raged on, many of the Serpent's crew fell, and the defences began to waver. Erik launched another attack, determined to avenge his father Håkon the Powerful, and bring down the man who had been his father's enemy, Olaf Tryggvason. The once impenetrable fortress that was the Long Serpent began to falter. In a final and desperate last stand, King Olaf Tryggvason and his remaining warriors fought valiantly, but the overwhelming numbers of their enemies proved too great. The defenders, surrounded and outnumbered, could not withstand the onslaught. In a last act of defiance, King Olaf chose to leap overboard, refusing to surrender to his foes. Clad in his heavy armour, he sank beneath the waves, the weight dragging him down into the depths of the sea, where he met his tragic end. Following the battle, the victorious leaders divided Norway among themselves. The Heimskringla saga provides the most detailed account of this division, describing it as a threefold split. Sweyn gained control of the Viking district, reasserting Danish dominance over the region. The King of Sweden received Trondheim and several other provinces, extending Swedish influence into the heart of Norway. The remainder of the land, including the western and northern regions, were awarded to Earl Eric, the hero of the battle, and his brother, Sweyn Hakonsson. While King Sweyn Forkbeard claimed overlordship over Norway, echoing his father Harald's dominion over Eric's father Hakon the Powerful, the true power lay fragmented among the victors, each ruling their respective territories with a measure of autonomy. Despite these events, Sweyn would ultimately become remembered in history as the King of Denmark and the Overlord of Norway. Under his rule, he granted the people of Norway religious freedom, a stark contrast to the oppressive reigns of his father Harald Bluetooth and the now dead Olaf Tryggvason. The tyrannical grip of enforced Christianity loosened, and the pagan gods of old could now once again be invoked without fear of persecution. The memory of the previous ruler's harsh measures faded, allowing a new era of relative tolerance and cultural revival to take root under Sweyn's sovereignty. In the year 1002, King Ethelred the Unready of England was driven to the brink of madness by the Danes and Norsemen. He would issue a grim decree, consumed by fury and desperation. He would order the brutal extermination of all men, women and children living within the Danelaw. This massacre, known as the St. Brice's Day Massacre, was a desperate and merciless attempt to purge the land of Scandinavian influence. The king's wrath knew no bounds. Even his own towns and villages were set ablaze. The long-settled Scandinavians, who had made England their home, were ruthlessly slaughtered without regard for their innocence. Among the countless victims was Gunhild, the sister of King Sweyn Forkbeard of Denmark, along with her husband and children. The slaying of Sweyn's sister ignited a spark of vengeance within his heart. Although Sweyn had not set foot in England for nearly a decade, the news of his sister's tragic end rekindled his desire for retribution, and with a burning sense of justice and a warrior's resolve, he turned his gaze once more towards the rich and troubled Kingdom of England. As chronicled by John of Worcester, Sweyn launched a ferocious assault on the English city of Exeter with a swift and brutal strike. He stormed the city, tearing down the walls from the eastern gate to the westward gate, leaving a path of devastation in his wake. Laden with immense plunder, he retreated to his ships, the city's wealth now his prize. But Sweyn's thirst for conquest was far from quenched. He and his hardened warriors ravaged Wiltshire, spreading terror and destruction. At the outset of the invasions, Sweyn negotiated an agreement with Duke Richard II of Normandy, whereby the Danes gained permission to sell their spoils of war in Normandy, further allowing the Vikings to make even more coin. The local ealdorman of Wiltshire, Elfric, stood by unwilling or unable to fight. Sensing the weakness of his foes, Sweyn led his forces to the city of Wilton, where they unleashed a torrent of violence, pillaging and burning the settlement to the ground. The flames of Wilton had barely cooled when Sweyn turned his wrath towards East Anglia. Descending upon Norwich, he unleashed chaos upon the city, plundering its riches and setting it ablaze. Ufsaitel, the ealdorman of East Anglia, caught off guard by the speed and ferocity of the Danish onslaught, had no time to muster a defence. In a desperate bid to protect his people, he convened with the East Anglian nobles and sought peace with the invader. Yet Sweyn's hunger for dominance knew no bounds, and just 3 weeks later, he shattered the fragile truce. Under the cover of darkness, Sweyn's forces landed secretly and laid siege to Thetford. The city was sacked, and after a night of ruthless plundering, the Danes set it ablaze at dawn, the flames licking the sky. In a desperate attempt to strike back, Ulfseitel commanded the local populace to destroy the enemy's ships. However, fear or hesitation gripped them, and the orders went unheeded. Undeterred, Ulfseitel gathered his forces. He then swiftly rallied his men for a final stand against the Danes. A fierce and bloody battle ensued, with the East Anglian nobles fighting valiantly, but falling amidst the carnage. Despite the heavy losses on both sides, the Danes narrowly escaped to their ships. The survivors later confessed that they had never faced a more ferocious and determined assault than that delivered by Ulfseitel and his men. Thus, Sweyn's brutal campaign of East Anglia was halted. In the year 1005, England was struck by a severe and widespread famine, a calamity that forced the Danish King Sweyn to withdraw to Denmark to recuperate. Sweyn, a formidable warrior known for his ruthless campaigns, had met his match in the battle-hardened Anglo-Saxons, who had become a fiercely warlike people through the years of Viking raids. Yet, despite their valour, the kingdom's unity seemed precarious under the rule of Ethelred the Unready, a king who had failed to command the respect of his great lords. Among his loyal subjects, Ulfseitel of East Anglia had proven himself a loyal defender, skillfully halting Sweyn's marauding forces. However, doubts lingered about the loyalty and ferocity of Ethelred's other earls. Would they rise to defend their land, or would they bend the knee to the Danish king's fury? It was the Jomsvikings' invasion of England in the years 1009 to 1012 that truly set the land ablaze. Under the leadership of Thorkel the Tall, the formidable new commander of the mercenary order, they ravaged both cities and the countryside, their ferocity unmatched. King Ethelred dare not confront Thorkel's seasoned warriors, and he failed to unite his lords to face the threat. The invaders soon seized the city of Canterbury, making it their stronghold and spreading fear across the realm. When word of the Jomsvikings' devastating campaign reached Sweyn in Denmark, he seized upon this golden opportunity. With England weakened and demoralised, Sweyn prepared to launch a full-scale invasion, bolstered by wealth and resources he had accumulated through the years of relentless plundering and raids. Now, with the means and the moment at hand, Sweyn stood poised to finally claim the rich and storied land of England for himself. According to the Chronicle of John of Worcester, in the fateful year of 1013, King Sweyn Forkbeard launched a campaign of unparalleled ferocity, commanding a formidable fleet that cut through the English seas like a blade through flesh. His ships swept into the port of Sandwich, where he lingered briefly. From there, he manoeuvred around the rugged coast of East Anglia, a shadow in murky waters, and made his entrance into the mouth of the Humber River. His fleet would surge upstream, cutting through the mist-shrouded River Trent to the town of Gainsborough, where he established an encampment. The might of Sweyn's approach was a mighty force, a storm that compelled submission wherever it swept. Earl Uhtred the Bold, the proud lord of Northumbria with his men, would be the first to bend the knee, soon followed by the people of the Five Boroughs. From Watling Street in London to the rugged borders of Scotland, the whole north bowed before Sweyn Forkbeard. However, Sweyn demanded more than mere loyalty. He commanded his new subjects to provide horses and provisions, consolidating his dominion with an unyielding grip. With his forces bolstered and hostages secured, he entrusted his ships and captives to his son Canute, and set his sights on further conquests. Sweyn's army, a tide of devastation, swept across eastern Mercia. Villages were plundered, fields were set ablaze, churches were desecrated as the Vikings cut down every man who dared stand against them. The air was thick with smoke and the cries of the dying as the ruthless invaders showed no mercy. The carnage would reach Oxford, which fell swiftly. Hostages were taken, and Sweyn's wrath surged onward to the city of Winchester, the ancient heart of Wessex and the cradle of England's kings. The city, overwhelmed by fear, hastily made peace and offered hostages in a desperate attempt to appease the brutal conqueror. The terrified citizens yielded to his every demand, their spirits crushed by the weight of his bloody reputation. The North, Midlands, and Wessex had now bent the knee to Sweyn. All he needed to cement his rule was the capital, London. As Sweyn approached the formidable walls of London, he was like a storm unleashed, determined to seize the city by sheer force and crown himself the King of England. But the city was not unprepared. King Ethelred, bolstered by the unwavering courage of his citizens and the fierce loyalty of Thorkel the Tall, the Viking chieftain, stood defiant. Thorkel, bound to Ethelred through his marriage to one of the king's daughters, led his seasoned warriors alongside the Londoners. Together, they repelled Sweyn's relentless assaults, the walls of London standing strong against the Danish fury. Frustrated but undeterred, Sweyn redirected his wrath towards Wallingford and then Bath, infuriated that his forces failed to take London. His army descended upon these towns like a scourge, plundering and burning with unbridled savagery. As they carved a path of destruction, the landscape was transformed into a wasteland of charred ruins and broken bodies. Such was Sweyn's fury. In Bath, the Danish king paused, allowing his war-weary soldiers a brief respite amidst the chaos. It was there that Ethelmar, the Ealdorman of Devonshire, along with the western thanes, approached him. They came not as warriors, but as supplicants, delivering hostages and swearing fealty in a bid to stave off any further devastation. One by one, the ancient kingdoms of England crumbled under Sweyn's onslaught. The Viking king, with his relentless, bloodthirsty army, set the land aflame, leaving nothing but desolation in their wake. Earls and lords, once proud and mighty, could do nothing but watch in helpless despair as Forkbeard's reign of terror swept across their lands. With Sweyn's demands being met, he strode purposely back to his fleet of dragon-headed longships. The ships, majestic and towering, awaited their sovereign's return, each vessel gleaming under the sun. English earls, lords, warriors, and thanes, a sea of nobles had gathered. They stood in awed silence before him. Sweyn Forkbeard, the legendary Viking who had bent the tides of fate to his will, was now hailed as the King of England by his Viking soldiers and the English nobles alike. The assembly erupted, chanting Sweyn's name in voices that echoed across the tumultuous waters and the land itself. "Forkbeard! Forkbeard!" they cried, their voices a reflection of his overwhelming power. In the heart of London, a pale dread lay heavy upon the city. The very air seemed to tremble with fear as the grim shadow of Sweyn Forkbeard loomed large over the populace. Gripped by tales of his unyielding wrath and the relentless fury of his campaigns, the citizens, now helpless before the might of the Viking king, rushed to offer hostages and implore for mercy. Whispers of Sweyn's savage retribution slithered through the city's narrow streets, filled with grim tales of his past cruelties. These rumours fanned the flames of terror, and in a desperate bid to avoid his wrath, the gates of London were thrown open to Sweyn's army. The citizens, their hearts heavy with fear, bowed to the inevitable, submitting to the conqueror whose name had become synonymous with unrelenting destruction. As the Viking king's forces poured into the city, London was gripped by a bloody siege of submission, the populace cowering beneath the blood-stained banner of Sweyn Forkbeard, who now stood as the undisputed ruler of England, his brutal conquest etched in the very soul of the land. In the wake of this turbulent upheaval, King Ethelred, witnessing the relentless advance of Sweyn's dominion and the disintegration of his own realm, took a fateful and desperate measure. He ordered the exile of his queen Emma of Normandy, along with his sons Edward and Alfred. Their departure signalled the twilight of an era and the dawn of a new age under Sweyn's iron rule. As the line of Wessex crumbled, their king fled to the safety of Normandy, leaving Sweyn to emerge as the supreme sovereign of England by right of conquest. Sweyn stood not only as the King of Denmark and the Overlord of Norway, but now in his new-found glory as the undisputed ruler of England. His reign, forged by iron and blood, marked a dramatic and enduring shift in the balance of power across the North Sea. Sweyn began meticulously reorganizing his empire, now at the very height of his power, becoming the most powerful Viking to have ever lived at the time. Sweyn Forkbeard, at the venerable age of 50, stood as one of the most legendary conquerors the Norse world had ever known. Yet his reign over England was tragically brief, lasting a mere 5 weeks. Numerous theories surround his death. Some claim he was killed, possibly murdered by English nobles seeking vengeance. Other sources suggest he succumbed to old age, having surpassed the typical lifespan of a man in the early medieval world. John of Worcester adds a supernatural element to Sweyn's demise. Sweyn the tyrant, notorious for his endless cruelties, committed a final act of desecration by demanding an enormous tribute from the town of St. Edmund, sacred since its dedication to the martyr. He threatened to raze the town, to destroy the martyr's church, and torture the clergy if his demands were not met, openly mocking the saint's sanctity. Divine retribution was swift. On the evening following the general court at Gainsborough, Sweyn, surrounded by his Danish warriors, saw St. Edmund approach him in a wrathful vision. Terrified, he cried out for help, but the saint's spear pierced him. Sweyn endured agonizing suffering until his death on February the 3rd, a fitting end for his blasphemous tyranny. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Sweyn may have died from old age, illness, or a noble's blade. Regardless, he is forever remembered as a towering and restless Viking, whose youthful days were marked by a fierce dedication to the pagan beliefs of his forefathers. Adam of Bremen recounts that Sweyn's fortunes took a divine turn upon his conversion to Christianity. He claimed that God's favour bestowed upon Sweyn the strength and success that characterised his many conquests and battles. To Adam, the mighty Viking king's embrace of the Christian faith was a turning point that earned him celestial blessings and unparalleled success. In stark contrast, John of Worcester paints a darker portrait of Sweyn, depicting him as a ruthless tyrant who ravaged churches, desecrated monasteries, and dealt mercilessly with the innocent. his reign marred by violence and destruction. Yet, in Emma's Iconium, Sweyn is glorified as the most fortunate of all kings, beloved by his followers and favoured by the divine. The text describes him as a monarch graced with unparalleled fortune, suggesting that God himself smiled upon him. The question remains if Sweyn did remain steadfast in his pagan traditions, instilled in him by the legends of his grandfather Gorm and his foster father Palnatoke, or did he embrace Christianity under the influence of his father Harald Bluetooth? Sweyn's recruitment of priests and bishops from England could have been a strategic manoeuvre rather than a sincere conversion. Ultimately, the true nature of Sweyn Forkbeard's heart and faith remains enshrouded in the fog of time, a mystery lost to the ages. Sweyn Forkbeard laid the cornerstone of a legacy that would echo through the ages. His unyielding conquests and masterful strategies carved a path for his son Canute, who would rise and become known as Cnut the Great, and forge the North Sea Empire. Under Canute's reign, the dreams of his father were not only realised, but magnified, turning Sweyn's victories into a formidable kingdom. Though Sweyn's reign of England was tragically brief, overshadowed by the soaring success of his son, his achievements were nothing short of monumental. Sweyn's saga, brimming with valour and audacity, echoes through the corridors of time, immortalised in sagas, songs and chronicles. He is celebrated as one of the greatest Viking kings, a titan whose influence cast a long shadow across the northern realm of Europe. Sweyn secured his place among the immortal legends of Viking lore, his descendants becoming kings, lords and earls, with his name being remembered and celebrated to this day. Canute the Great, the formidable Viking king and conqueror, stands as the most powerful Viking ruler in history, as the sovereign of the North Sea Empire. His dominion encompassed England, Denmark and Norway. He was the only king to turn Scandinavia into a global power at the time, and this reflected his unparalleled might and influence. Canute's life and reign have been immortalised in numerous sagas and in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which vividly recount his extraordinary exploits. These tales celebrate his valour in battle, his astute political manoeuvres, and his brilliance as a ruler. Canute's ascension to the English throne was marked by some of the fiercest battles the British Isles had ever witnessed. His relentless rivalry with Edmund Ironside is a saga in itself, chronicled in medieval manuscripts that highlight their epic confrontations and tactical genius. Even Canute's childhood was steeped in legend. Raised in Jomsborg just like his father Sweyn Forkbeard, a renowned warrior king and Viking of great repute, Canute was destined for greatness from the very beginning. This is the tale of the most powerful Viking king who ever lived, and the battles and events that led to his ascent. This is the story of Canute the Great. Canute, the son of the King of Denmark Sweyn Forkbeard, was born in the year 990 into a legacy already rich with legend and conquest. Sweyn Forkbeard had forged his own formidable path long before Canute's birth, most notably by rebelling against his father King Harald Bluetooth. Harald Bluetooth, celebrated as the first king to introduce Christianity to Denmark, met a tragic end due to this familial rebellion, paving the way for Sweyn's early ascent to the throne. This familial history of power struggles and conquest undoubtedly shaped Canute's destiny. His father Sweyn Forkbeard's passion for battle and dominance was a defining trait, and it is said that both father and son shared a bloodline descending from the legendary Sigurd Snake in the Eye, who was the son of the famed Viking hero Ragnar Lothbrok. This illustrious lineage imbued Canute with a sense of predestined greatness, a heritage of mythic proportions that fueled his ambitions and prowess. Little is known about the early life of Canute, yet certain sagas provide glimpses into his formative years. The Flateyjarbók, a 13th century Icelandic manuscript, recounts that Canute was sent to Jomsborg, a Viking stronghold situated on the southern coast of the Baltic Sea. There, he was fostered by Thorkel the Tall, a warrior of legendary prowess and a prominent member of the Joms Vikings, an elite order of Viking mercenaries. The Joms Vikings were renowned for their unwavering dedication to the worship of the Old Norse gods and their exceptional combat skills. They would fight for any lord who could afford their considerable fees. Admission into the Joms Vikings was no small feat. Prospective members were required to demonstrate their strength and valour, often through a ritual duel known as Holmgang with an existing Joms Viking. Given his royal blood and the illustrious reputation of his lineage, Canute's path to joining the Joms Vikings was laden with expectation. His father, Sweyn Forkbeard, had also been raised by the order's founder, Palnatók, which would only burden Canute if he failed. To prove himself worthy of admission, Canute would have had to undergo and succeed in the rigorous trials set forth by the Joms Vikings, demonstrating his mettle and earning his place among the formidable warriors. This period in Jomsborg was crucial in shaping Canute's character and honing his martial skills. Under the mentorship of Thorkel the Tall, he would have absorbed invaluable lessons in leadership, strategy, and combat, preparing him for the epic challenges and conquests that lay ahead. This legendary upbringing, steeped in the traditions and rigour of the Joms Vikings, undoubtedly contributed to Canute's prowess as a ruler and warrior, laying the foundation for his future as a mighty Viking king. A description of Canute appears in the 13th century Icelandic Knytlinga saga. Canute was exceptionally tall and strong, and the handsomest of men, all except for his nose that was thin, high-set, and rather crooked. He had a fair complexion and a fine, thick head of hair. His eyes were better than those of other men, being both more handsome and keener sighted. In the Knutsdrapa, an Old Norse poem, there is a statement that Canute was of no great age when he first went to war. Due to this, there is speculation that he could have either seen action with the Joms Vikings, or that he could have went raiding with his father Sweyn Forkbeard during his early teens. In the year 1002, a dark and tragic chapter unfolded in the history of England. King Ethelred the Unready decreed a brutal massacre, targeting thousands of Danes and Northmen residing within his kingdom. This ruthless command did not spare even the innocent women and children, resulting in widespread carnage and sorrow. Ethelred had been driven half mad by relentless Viking raids on his kingdom, and in a rage, he ordered the extermination of all the Danes that had sprung up on his island, resulting in much death. Among the many victims of this horrific event were Gunhild, the sister of Sweyn Forkbeard, the formidable king of Denmark, and her husband, Palig Toksen, the Danish ealdorman of Devonshire. Their deaths were not merely personal losses, but a grievous affront to Sweyn Forkbeard, igniting a fierce desire for retribution. During this time, Thorkel the Tall would become the chief of the Joms Vikings and would launch his own invasion of England. He would burn much of the land, extorted the nobles and King Ethelred himself, and he would also besiege Canterbury, capturing its wealth, and used the city as his base of operations. However, Thorkel would eventually side with King Ethelred of England, as he married one of his daughters and was no doubt promised much. Canute must have been recalled by his father Sweyn to his court before the Joms Viking occupation of England, as Canute is only recorded to have landed in England with his father in the Peterborough Chronicle. The St. Brice's Day massacre set in motion a chain of events. that would alter the course of history. Sweyn Forkbeard, driven by a blend of grief and fury, resolved to exact revenge. He launched a full-scale invasion of England, a campaign marked by relentless determination and strategic brilliance. Accompanying him on this formidable quest was his son Canute, who was now ready to sail beside his father and finally whet his sword. Together, father and son embarked on this vengeful expedition, their journey across the sea, fueled by the desire to avenge the blood of their kin and reclaim honour. The invasion was not merely a quest for revenge, but also a pivotal moment that would shape the future of England and its rulers. Thorkel the Tall had caused so much disarray in England that Sweyn used this chaotic time to prepare his invasion, and he soon departed. The medieval Peterborough Chronicle reports the following events. Before August, King Sweyn arrived with his fleet at Sandwich. He swiftly moved through East Anglia into the mouth of the Humber River, then sailed up the Trent River to Gainsborough. Earl Uhtred and all of Northumbria quickly submitted to him, as did the people of the Kingdom of Lindsey and the 5 boroughs. Each region provided hostages. When Sweyn realised that everyone had surrendered, he ordered his forces to be supplied and given horses. He then led the main part of his invasion force south, while some troops and hostages stayed with his son Canute. After crossing Watling Street, they advanced to Oxford, where the townspeople quickly surrendered and gave more hostages. From there, they moved to Winchester, where the same happened, and then continued eastward to London. While Sweyn invaded the north, he married his young son Canute to an English noblewoman named Elgifu to seal the North's loyalty. The couple would go on to have a son named Sven. The Londoners would resist the forces of Sweyn Forkbeard due to the ferocity of their new commander Thorkel the Tall, who now fought for the English. Although the Vikings managed to repel Sweyn's army, the Viking kings simply abandoned the siege and went on to conquer other areas of England. Eventually, the entirety of England succumbed to the overwhelming might of Sweyn's Viking horde. King Ethelred, faced with the relentless advance of his enemies, sent his sons Edward and Alfred to the relative safety of Normandy. He himself sought refuge, spending Christmas on the Isle of Wight, before joining his own sons in exile. With England under his control, Sweyn established his base in Gainsborough in Lincolnshire. From this strategic location, he began the arduous task of organising his vast new kingdom, laying the foundations for what he hoped would be a prosperous reign. However, fate had other plans. On the 3rd of February in the year 1014, after a mere 5 weeks as the ruler of England, Sweyn unexpectedly died. The exact cause of death remains a mystery. Some theories suggest that he was assassinated, possibly by those loyal to the deposed Ethelred. Other accounts propose that Sweyn met his end after falling from a horse, and others believed he succumbed to natural causes at the age of around 50. Despite his brief rule, Sweyn Forkbeard's impact on England was profound, as his brilliance and brutal reputation is what kept the English earls in check, and upon his death, chaos would unfold. The leading English nobleman, wary of Danish rule, dispatched a delegation to negotiate the restoration of King Ethelred to the throne. However, their support came with stringent conditions. The terms of this agreement held significant constitutional importance in early English history, marking the first recorded pact between a king and his subjects. This unprecedented accord underscored a deep-seated distrust which many of the English noblemen harboured towards Ethelred, prompting their initial submission to Sweyn. Determined to reclaim his throne, Ethelred launched an expedition against Canute and his Danish allies. However, only the people of the Kingdom of Lindsey which is modern North Lincolnshire, remained loyal to Canute. Ethelred's campaign began with the objective of recapturing London. He received crucial support from Olaf Haraldsson, a formidable Norwegian leader. According to the Icelandic historian Snorri Sturluson, Olaf led a daring and successful assault on London Bridge, commanding a fleet of ships that played a pivotal role in the battle. Following this triumph, Olaf continued to assist Ethelred in retaking London and other parts of the country. Faced with mounting resistance and the resurgence of Ethelred's forces, Canute and his army decided to withdraw from England in April of the year 1014. This retreat left their allies in England to bear the brunt of Ethelred's retribution, a grim consequence of their steadfast support for the Danish prince. Thus, the tides of power shifted once more, as England's landscape was reshaped by alliances, betrayals, and the relentless pursuit of the throne. The saga of Ethelred's restoration and Canute's temporary retreat illustrates the volatile nature of medieval politics and the intricate web of loyalties that defined this tumultuous period in English history. Upon the death of Sweyn Forkbeard, his younger son Harald was named the King of Denmark. It was to this Scandinavian sanctuary that Canute fled, seeking refuge and support in the court of his brother. In the halls of Danish power, Canute found solace and, more importantly, the resources to pursue his grand ambitions. For Canute had just lost everything. His father was dead, and his claim to the English throne was now nothing but a dream. Harald, now the ruler of Denmark, understood the importance of aiding his exiled brother. Canute, undeterred by past setbacks, began to meticulously assemble a formidable fleet. With Harald's backing, he gathered ships and warriors, preparing for another bold attempt to claim the English throne. He would not let his father's conquest of the land be in vain, and he had to reclaim the land he now saw as his by right. Thorkel the Tall, once the staunch defender of Ethelred, ultimately forsook his service to join forces with Canute, swearing fealty to the young Viking leader. Despite having previously deserted the Viking cause and fought against Canute's father Sweyn during the siege of London, Thorkel's allegiance was a strategic and significant gain for Canute. For Thorkel was no ordinary warrior. He commanded the Vikings, the elite group of Viking mercenaries famed over Scandinavia, renowned for their exceptional combat skills. Moreover, Thorkel had a deep personal connection to Canute, having served as his foster father. This bond of kinship and shared history added profound significance to their reconciliation. Thus, Canute's campaign was enhanced with the might of the Vikings and the wisdom of a seasoned warrior who had once been his guardian. He also had the aid of his brother Harald, the King of Denmark, who provided many men and a fleet of longships. Moreover, Canute sought the assistance of Boleslaw the Brave, the Duke of Poland, who generously lent a contingent of Polish troops to bolster Canute's invasion. This alliance was further strengthened by the support of the Northmen. Erik Håkonsson, the esteemed Earl of Lade and Governor of Norway, pledged his aid to the young prince. Erik not only led his men personally, but also provided thousands of battle-hardened Vikings, renowned for their ferocity and skill in combat. Thus, in the summer of the year 1015, Canute would sail to England with a huge army, estimated to be 10,000 strong, with over 200 longships. He was at the head of an army of Vikings from all over Scandinavia, and the young prince would glide across the North Sea, with his aim being the reconquest of England, battle reputation, wealth, and glory. According to the Peterborough Chronicle manuscript, in September of the year 1015, Canute came into Sandwich and straight away sailed around Kent to Wessex, until he came to the mouth of the Frome and harried in Dorset and Wiltshire and Somerset. It is said that this bloody war was of the same intensity of the battles of Alfred the Great, foreshadowing an epic conflict. A passage from Queen Emma's Iconium provides a picture of Canute's fleet. There were so many kinds of shields that you could have believed that troops of all nations were present. Gold shone on the prows, silver also flashed on the variously shaped ships. Furthermore, on this great expedition, there was present no slave, no low-born man, or no man weakened by age. All were noble, strong, and sufficiently fit for any type of fighting. When Canute landed in England, he would reunite with his wife Elfgifu and his son Sweyn. Elfgifu would fall pregnant again, and would give birth to a second son, remembered to history as Harald Hardrada. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, during Canute's initial invasion, King Ethelred of England was gravely ill, and due to this, the men of England did not have a figurehead to rally behind, or a decisive leader. During this time, the ealdorman Edric Striona would gather his forces, while the Etheling Edmund mustered his troops in the north. However, when they were united, Edric attempted to betray Edmund, though he failed in his treacherous endeavour. As a result, their forces would disperse without engaging in battle, yielding ground to Canute's forces. Seizing a strategic moment, the ealdorman Edric would defect to Canute's side, and consequently the men of Wessex submitted to Canute's authority, offering hostages and horses to bolster the Viking army. Canute's forces entrenched themselves into the ancestral seat of the king, Wessex, and he solidified his control there over midwinter. In the year 1016, Canute departed from his stronghold in Wessex with his formidable army, accompanied by the treacherous ealdorman Edric. They crossed the Thames into Mercia during the harsh midwinter, ravaging the land, burning villages, and slaying all who stood in their way. In response, Edmund the Etheling, the eldest son of King Ethelred, began to gather his forces. However, the assembled troops were adamant that they would not fight unless the king himself joined their ranks. When this did not come to pass, they abandoned the expedition, each man returning to his home. Subsequently, the English forces were summoned once more, with a stern decree that every able man must join under severe penalties. Yet, the king, extremely ill, could not make the journey. The king soon discovered that those who were supposed to aid him were in fact plotting his betrayal. Amidst this turmoil, Edmund rode to Northumbria to seek the support of Earl Uhtred, hoping to rally an army against King Canute. Responding to Edmund's call, Uhtred raised a Northumbrian army. Together, they began to ravage Mercia in retaliation against the treacherous ealdorman Edric, who had betrayed them and sided with Canute. In the meantime, Canute led his Viking horde northward, advancing to York. His path was marked by the burning and pillaging of towns and villages, leaving a trail of devastation in his wake. Upon hearing of Canute's movements, Uhtred ceased his plundering and hastened northwards, realizing his lands had been overrun by the Viking army. Realizing the dire situation, he submitted to Canute, along with all the Northumbrians, delivering hostages as a sign of their surrender. Despite this, Canute ordered Uhtred's assassination, and following his death, Canute appointed Eric, the governor of Norway, as the new Earl of Northumbria, replacing Uhtred. After securing the north, Canute moved southwards, taking a different route through the west. By Easter, his entire army had returned to their ships, and during this time, Edmund the Etheling would journey to London to be with his ill father. Prince Canute would soon set sail with his entire fleet towards London, yet Before his ships could arrive, King Ethelred passed away, marking the end of his reign and ushering in a new chapter in England's turbulent history. King Ethelred met his end on April the 23rd in the year 1016, and London's citizens and councillors promptly crowned his son Edmund as their king. Meanwhile, the rest of the Witan convened at Southampton, electing Canute as the new ruler of England. Thus, Canute found himself recognised as king, though his reign was far from secure. Half of the English nobles had only submitted to him out of fear, and he knew his newly acquired throne would be fiercely contested by the valiant Edmund. In a desperate bid to defend his homeland, Edmund embarked on a campaign of ferocious resistance. As the Danes laid siege to London, Edmund journeyed to Wessex, the very heart of England, and his ancestral stronghold. There, the people rallied to his cause, and he swiftly assembled a formidable army. His clashes with the Danes and their English supporters were brutal, bloody encounters, yet they remained inconclusive. Undeterred, Edmund then broke the siege of London, where the city's valiant citizens had resisted the Danish onslaught. In a bloody battle near Brentford, Edmund achieved a decisive victory over the Vikings, forcing them to renew their siege efforts. Edmund's resolve was unshakable. He would return to Wessex, rally more troops, and once again would march to relieve London. His crushing victory at Oxford sent Canute's forces reeling, and Edmund would relentlessly pursue them into Kent. The notorious Edric Striona, sensing the shifting tides of war, switched allegiances again to join Edmund. Striona's betrayal underscored the desperate and chaotic nature of the conflict, as both sides grappled for dominance amidst the blood-soaked landscape. Edmund's defiance painted the land red with the blood of his foes. He fought tirelessly to reclaim England from the Danish invaders, his prowess in battle earning him the epithet Ironside. The will of his army was unyielding as iron, their spirits unbreakable, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Edmund would prove his mettle as a warrior king, amidst the chaos and carnage of a nation in turmoil. King Edmund Ironside and King Canute would face off in a climactic battle at Assendon. Edmund had assembled the whole nation of England and had a considerable bigger army, but Canute had the might of Scandinavia and the battle-hardened Jom's Vikings at his disposal. According to Queen Emma's Iconium, this is what transpired during the battle. Edmund endeavoured to expel the king and the Danes from English soil, amassing a formidable force for a sudden assault. Yet the Danes swiftly learned of his plan, abandoning their ships and preparing to face whatever doom awaited them. They carried with them a banner of eerie and strange nature, a piece of plain white silk upon which no figure was visible, but in times of war, a raven appeared on it as if by dark magic, its beak opening, wings flapping, and feet restless in victory. Looking out for this, Thorkel said, "Let us fight manfully, comrades, for no danger threatens us, for the restive raven of the prophetic banner bears witness." Emboldened by these words, the Danes, clad in mail and armour, met the English at Assendon, and there, before the battle, Ealdorman Edric of Mercia addressed his Mercian ranks. "Let us flee, O comrades, and snatch our lives from imminent death, or else we will fall forthwith, for I know the hardihood of the Danes." Concealing his banner, he then turned his back on the enemy, leading many soldiers away from the battlefield. It was later revealed that this act of cowardice was a calculated betrayal, a promise to the Danes in exchange for favour. Witnessing the treachery and surrounded by the enemy, Edmund Ironside rallied his men with a cry and gave a passionate speech. He then advanced into the midst of the enemy, and the battle would begin. A brutal infantry battle ensued, with the outnumbered Danes refusing to retreat, choosing death over the shame of flight. They fought with relentless vigour, from the 9th hour of the day until nightfall. The warriors did not falter in the dark, driven by the desire to vanquish their foes. Exhausted, the English began to falter, contemplating retreat as the Danes, unified in their resolve, seemed invincible in their rage-fueled frenzy. Overwhelmed by the relentless Danish assault and the lengthening shadows, the English broke ranks and fled, falling before their pursuers. The battle is mentioned briefly in the Canute saga, which quotes a verse of Skaldic poetry. You worked well in the shield wall, warrior king. Brown was the flesh of bodies, served to the bloodbird. In the slaughter you won, sire, with your sword, north of the Danes' woods. Edmund Ironside himself would survive the battle, though he was significantly wounded. He would seek refuge and potential allies, possibly aiming to join forces with his supporters in Wales. However, Canute was restless within his pursuit, and he tracked him down to the Forest of Dean. Legend has it that Edmund Ironside, despite his injuries, boldly challenged Canute to single combat. The Danish king, however, admiring the courage and tenacity of his rival, proposed a different solution. Although Canute had been trained by the formidable Joms Vikings, Edmund Ironside was a warrior of known renown, and the Danish king declined the offer. Though Canute held the power to crush Edmund's battered forces, he was moved by a profound respect for the warrior king. In a gesture of peace, Canute offered a compromise. Edmund would retain the kingdom of Wessex, while Canute would rule over Northumbria, Mercia and East Anglia. An intriguing clause was also added to their treaty. Upon the death of either monarch, the survivor would inherit the entire kingdom. With this accord, the realm found a temporary peace under the shared rule of the Saxon and Viking kings. The ink on the treaty had barely dried before fate intervened to enforce its terms. By November of the year 1016, Edmund Ironside succumbed to his wounds and the relentless toll of battle, his life extinguished in the prime of his valour. Some sources claim that Edmund was murdered, although the circumstances of his death are unknown, most historians believing he succumbed to his wounds. However, another theory presents itself. Henry of Huntingdon wrote, "When Edmund, fearful and most formidable to his enemies, was prospering in his kingdom, he went one night to the lavatory to answer a call of nature. There, the son of Ealdorman Edric, who by his father's plan was concealed in the pit of the privy, struck the king twice with a sharp knife in the private parts, and leaving the weapon in his bowels fled away." Thus, one account of his death was that Edric Striona had him assassinated, but Canute still may have had him killed. His death was a sorrowful end to his defiant resistance, but it also signified the dawn of a new era. As the fallen king was laid to rest, the Saxon crown passed to Canute. The formidable Viking warrior was now crowned as the undisputed ruler of England. Thus, Canute ascended to the throne in the year 1017, his dominion extending across the entire English realm, and even the West Saxons now accepted him as king. This transition marked the beginning of a new period of relative stability and integration, as Canute's reign sought to unify the diverse peoples and cultures within his kingdom. Canute held such profound respect for his fallen adversary that on the anniversary of Edmund's death, he made a solemn visit to his tomb. In a gesture of deep reverence and honour, he placed upon it a cloak adorned with peacocks. These magnificent birds, symbols of resurrection, were meant to aid Edmund in his salvation. This act reflected an enduring bond of respect between two great warrior kings, whose lives and fates had been so intricately entwined. At the age of 26, Canute had conquered his new kingdom, and as the Danish King of England, he swiftly moved to eliminate any potential threats from the remnants of the once powerful Wessex dynasty. The first year of his reign was marred by the executions of several English noblemen who he deemed suspect. Ethelred's son, Eadwig Atheling, fled England only to be killed on Canute's orders. Similarly, Edmund Ironside's sons sought refuge abroad. Ethelred's sons by Emma of Normandy found protection under their relatives in the Duchy of Normandy. In addition to dealing with the old English nobility, Canute would begin to redistribute the earldoms. Initially, Canute retained personal control over Wessex, while Northumbria was entrusted to Eric Hakonson. East Anglia was given to Thorkel the Tall, and Mercia remained under the control of Edric Striona. This distribution of power rewarded Canute's key generals and staunchest supporters. Thorkel, for his critical role in the war with his fierce Joms Vikings, Eric, for providing a substantial number of battle-hardened Northmen, and Edric, for his timely desertion of the English, which allowed Canute to secure victory at the Battle of Assendon. However, this initial power arrangement proved to be short-lived. During a meeting at the Royal Palace in London with Canute and his high-ranking earls and generals, Edric was accused of having wavering loyalty and hesitating between both sides during the war. Canute then declared, "Pay this man what we owe him," whereupon the Northman Eric Hakonson promptly decapitated Edric with an axe. Canute then ordered Edric's body to be thrown over the city wall, leaving it unburied. His head was placed upon a pole atop the highest battlement of the Tower of London, a grim and fitting end for England's most infamous traitor. Although Canute was married to Elfgifu of Northampton and had 2 sons with her, he sought the hand of Emma of Normandy, the widow of the late King of England. Seeking to bridge the past and the future, Canute took Emma as his wife. Their union produced 2 children, Harthcanute and Gunhilda. Historical records describe their marriage as a happy one, with both partners diligently fulfilling their roles as rulers. Emma played a pivotal role in mending the strained relationship between Canute and the church. Although baptized as a Christian, Canute had previously caused considerable damage to church property during his raids. Emma took it upon herself to oversee the reconstruction of these churches and replenish their coffers, often at the crown's expense. She collaborated efficiently with the church, donating land and presenting many beautiful and valuable items, such as a golden cross to the new construction at Winchester. Emma frequently ruled in England alone, while Canute travelled extensively. What began as a political marriage gradually evolved into a loving union, demonstrating the strength and adaptability of both partners in their shared reign. Canute's brother Harald, the King of Denmark, may have attended Canute's coronation in the year 1016. Following the ceremony, Harald would return to Denmark, taking part of his fleet with him. However, Harald would die childless due to an unknown cause still young in the year 1018, prompting Canute to journey to Denmark to secure his succession to the Danish crown. It appears that some Danes opposed him, leading to an attack on the Wends. During this expedition, one of Canute's Englishmen, Godwin, gained the king's trust by leading a successful nighttime raid against the Wendish encampment. Due to this, Canute would give Godwin the earldom of Wessex. With Canute's ascent on the Danish throne now firmly established, he returned to England in the year 1020. He appointed Ulf Jarl, the husband of his sister Estrid, as the regent of Denmark. Ulf was also entrusted with the care of Harthcanute, Canute's son by Queen Emma, whom he had designated as his heir. This arrangement ensured the stability and continuity of Canute's reign in Denmark, while he continued to govern in his headquarters in England. Olaf Haraldsson had led a daring and successful assault against Canute, while King Ethelred the Unready was still alive, driving Canute out of England before his eventual re-invasion. Olaf, a descendant of Harald Fairhair, the first King of Norway, saw an opportunity as Norway was in disarray after the death of King Sweyn Forkbeard. In the year 1015, Olaf returned to Norway and declared himself king, securing the allegiance of 5 petty kings in the Norwegian uplands. In the year 1016, at the Battle of Nesjar, he decisively defeated Earl Sweyn, one of the Earls of Lade, and the de facto ruler of Norway. This victory solidified Olaf's claim to the throne, and marked the beginning of his reign over a unified Norway. Upon Canute's return to his main headquarters in England, King Olaf Haraldsson of Norway and Arnud Jacob of Sweden saw their chance and began launching attacks against Denmark. Seizing upon these incursions, Jarl Ulf cleverly provided the Danish freemen with a pretext to accept the young Harthcanute, who was still a child, as their king. This strategic maneuver allowed Ulf to rule the kingdom as his regent, significantly elevating his status and consolidating his power within the realm. When news of these incursions reached Canute, he swiftly set sail for Denmark. This culminated in the epic Battle of Helge. Canute's navy was immense, with his flagship reputed to be 80 meters long. In a strategic move, the Swedish and Norwegian kings constructed a large dam of peat and lumber on the river. As the Danish navy sailed, the dam was breached, releasing a torrent of water that drowned many Danes and Englishmen. However, the main strength of Canute's fleet lay outside the river harbour. Once the ships in the harbour were destroyed, the remaining fleet converged from all directions. Realising they had no chance against the rest of the fleet, the kings Olaf and Arnud Jacob ordered their ships to retreat. Had the battle continued, they would have faced significant losses, as Canute's fleet vastly outnumbered theirs. King Canute, however, chose not to pursue them. Following the battle, the Norwegian nobles, brimming with discontent and dissatisfaction, rallied behind the invasion led by King Canute of Denmark. With the Norse jarls and nobles no longer supporting Olaf Haraldsson, he found himself with little choice but to flee. Olaf would go into exile in the distant lands of the Kievan Rus. This left Canute as the prominent leader in Scandinavia. Sometime after the battle, he subjugated the core provinces of Norway, where he even minted his own coins, further cementing his dominance in the region. In the year 1028, at an assembly in Trondheim, he was officially crowned the king. He took on the grand title of the King of all England, Denmark, Norway, and a part of Sweden. This coronation marked him as the most powerful Viking king in living memory, ruling over what became known as the North Sea Empire. Ulf Jarl had tried to seize power by crowning Harthcanute as the King of Denmark, thus making himself the regent. His participation in the Battle of Helge ultimately did not earn him Canute's forgiveness. Some accounts tell of a tense moment between the brothers-in-law during a chess game. An argument would flare, and the following day, one of Canute's guards, acting with the king's blessing, killed Ulf. This act starkly demonstrated Canute's ruthless nature towards those he mistrusted. With his adversaries in Scandinavia subdued and seemingly at ease, Canute graciously accepted an invitation to witness the ascension of the Holy Roman Emperor Conrad II in Rome. Departing from Denmark, he journeyed to the coronation ceremony in Easter of the year 1027, an event of immense prestige for medieval European rulers. During his return voyage, Canute penned a letter informing his English subjects of his plans from afar. He declared himself the king of all England and Denmark, of the Norwegians, and of some of the Swedes, affirming his expansive domain and authority. Embracing his role as a Christian monarch, Canute expressed that his pilgrimage to Rome was motivated by a desire to repent for his sins, seek redemption, and ensure the security of his subjects. He sought to negotiate with the Pope. Additionally, he sought to improve conditions for pilgrims and merchants travelling the road to Rome, reflecting his commitment to governance and faith. This is what Canute wrote in his own words. "I spoke with the Emperor himself and the Lord Pope, and the princes there, about the needs of all my people of my entire realm, both English and Danes, that a juster law and securer peace might be granted to them on the road to Rome, and that they should not be strained by so many barriers along the road, and harassed by unjust tolls. And the Emperor agreed, and likewise King Robert, who governs most of these toll gates, and all the magnates confirmed by edict that my people, both merchants and others who want to travel to make their devotions, might go to Rome and return without being afflicted by barriers and toll collectors, in firm peace and secure in a just law." As the ruler of three kingdoms, Canute's stature in Europe was formidable, highlighted by his participation alongside the King of Burgundy in the imperial procession, standing shoulder to shoulder with the Emperor on a shared pedestal, reflecting Canute's scope of power in the broader realm of early medieval Europe. Canute's pilgrimage to Rome was a triumph, celebrated in the Cnut by Sigvat the Skald, who praised Canute, describing him as dear to the Emperor and close to Peter. In the medieval Christian world, a king believed to have divine favour could expect prosperity within his realm. This strengthened Canute's position not only within the church and his people, but also in fostering alliances that resolved conflicts within his kingdom. Clever and seasoned in battle, Canute cultivated an image as a just Christian king, statesman, diplomat, and crusader against injustice. He would quickly change the narrative all over Europe, from a Viking conqueror to a just and administrative king. Canute was to return to Denmark from Rome, arrange for its security, and afterwards set sail to England. However, in the year 1030, Olaf would return for the Norwegian crown, which would result in the Battle of Stiklestad. Although Canute was not present at the battle, his forces crushed Olaf's, thus leaving Canute as the undisputed monarch of Norway. Canute's conquests and the stern measures he took against the displaced ruling dynasty had strained his relationship with the church. Rumours circulated that his upbringing in the pagan stronghold of Jomsborg and him having two wives, Emma of Normandy and Elfgifu of Northampton, conflicted with the church's teachings. Canute sought to mend these rifts and embarked on a campaign to rehabilitate the English churches and monasteries that had long suffered under Viking raids, replenishing their treasuries and overseeing the constructions of new religious institutions. His efforts extended to supporting monastic communities zealously, reflecting his commitment to Christianity, as Denmark and Norway themselves were still on the path to becoming Christian nations. A bishop wrote this about King Canute in a medieval manuscript. "When we saw the gift that you sent us, we were amazed at your knowledge, as well as your faith, since you, whom we had heard to be a pagan prince, we now know you to be not only a Christian, but also a most generous donor to God's churches and servants." However, the sincerity of Canute's religious convictions remain ambiguous. While he demonstrated reverence for Christianity through his actions, historians debate whether his piety was genuine or not. It could have been a strategy to consolidate his rule and secure the loyalty of his subjects. Despite his Christian reforms, traces of pagan traditions persisted in Canute's court, evident in the poetry that celebrated Norse mythology, a departure from the strict adherence to Christian doctrine observed by leaders like Saint Olaf of Norway. His pilgrimage to Rome in the year 1027, however, could reflect his deep commitment to Christianity. Historians speculate that his journey to witness the coronation of Conrad II was not merely a diplomatic gesture, but a sincere effort to foster goodwill between two influential realms. Despite the complexities of his personal life, which included 2 simultaneous marriages, a practice frowned upon by the Church, Canute's reputation as a devout man endures. His treatment of adversaries within the Christian community was often severe. During his rule, Canute achieved a remarkable consolidation of power, bridging the English and Danish realms and exerting dominance over both Scandinavian territories and the British Isles. His military campaigns reshaped the landscape of Viking influence, redirecting the focus of Norse conquest back towards Scandinavia. Canute's reinstatement of the laws of King Edgar facilitated governance across his diverse domains, establishing a legal framework that accommodated the cultural and legal practices of both Saxons and Scandinavians. Canute's administrative reforms extended to economic policies as well. His efforts to standardize coinage further promoted economic stability and facilitated trade across his North Sea region. In his royal court, Canute fostered a diverse environment that included English and Scandinavian advisors, setting the stage for the gradual emergence of an Anglo-Scandinavian society. The era of Canute marked a unique chapter in Viking history, where the once fearless raiders transitioned into a global power. Due to this, Canute would gain the epithet Canute the Great. Across the massive North Sea Empire, from Scandinavia to England, Canute's reign became the stuff of myth, inspiring narratives that celebrated his extraordinary life and enduring impact on the medieval world. His legend would grow so large that stories of Canute's power would make people believe he had supernatural abilities. In one episode, Henry of Huntingdon tells the story of King Canute and the tide. Canute set his throne by the seashore and commanded the incoming tide to halt and not wet his feet and robes. Yet, continuing to rise as usual, the tide dashed over his feet and legs, without respect to his royal person. Then the king leapt backwards, saying, "Let all men know how empty and worthless is the power of kings, for there is none worthy of the name, but he whom heaven, earth, and sea obey by eternal laws." He then hung his gold crown on a crucifix, and never wore it again, to the honour of God the Almighty King. In the year 1030, Canute the Great appointed his first son Sweyn as the King of Norway. With Sweyn only being 14 years old, his mother Ælfgifu ruled as regent on his behalf. This appointment greatly disappointed many Norwegian nobles, who had hoped to assume power after the death of Olaf Haraldsson. Nobles such as Einar Indridason felt particularly betrayed, believing Canute had promised them positions of authority. The 1030s proved to be challenging years across Europe. Danish policy in Norway underwent significant changes, with increased royal involvement and the implementation of stringent taxes. These actions laid the groundwork for the widespread resistance against the new regime, echoing the opposition that King Olaf had previously encountered. According to the sagas, Ælfgifu and Sveyn's heavy tax demands and new laws fostered resentment towards Canute, the overlord of the North Sea Empire. In the year 1035, Cnut the Great would die in England. His brilliance is what held his vast empire together, and with his passing, numerous claimants emerged for his many kingdoms. The ensuing power struggles reflected the nature of Canute's dominion. In Norway, the discontented noble Einar Endridason took decisive action. He travelled to Russia to bring back Magnus, the son of the old king Olaf Haraldsson. When Magnus arrived in Norway, the people rallied to his cause, rejecting Danish rule. Sweyn, unable to maintain his kingdom, fled back to Denmark, where he died shortly afterwards. In the year 1035, Magnus was proclaimed the King of Norway at the tender age of 11, marking the end of Danish rule and the beginning of a new dynasty. Meanwhile, in England, Canute's second son with Elfgifu of Northampton, Harald Hardrada, ascended to the throne. Harold's reign was marked by political intrigue and strife, as he sought to consolidate power in a kingdom that had been deeply influenced by his father's legacy, and because he was seen to have stolen his brother Harthcanute's throne. Harthcanute would also become a king, and inherited his father's ancestral kingdom of Denmark, but he would plan war on his half-brother, Harald Hardrada. Before the two sons of Canute could go to war, Harald Hardrada would die, still young in the year 1040, leaving no heirs to continue his line. Harthcanute, Canute's son with Emma of Normandy, succeeded Harold as the King of England. His time on the throne was fraught with challenges, as he attempted to govern both England and Denmark. Harthcanute managed to maintain his grip on power for 2 years as the monarch of both nations. Yet, his rule was cut short when he died childless in the year 1042, poisoned at a wedding. This abrupt and violent end symbolised the fragility of the once mighty empire that Canute had meticulously built. Thus, within 7 years of Canute's death in the year 1035, by the year 1042, his entire line was extinguished, all of his male heirs had perished, and the vast dominion he had ruled, stretching across the North Sea, was reduced to a shadow of its former glory. The North Sea Empire, which had seemed impregnable under Canute's formidable leadership, rapidly disintegrated. His ambitious vision of a unified and powerful northern realm was shattered, leaving behind only the remnants of fleeting grandeur and the whispers of legend. The empire Canute forged was inherently unstable, dependent on his brilliance, reputation, and alliances. The North Sea Empire under Canute's rule were the only time where the Vikings became a global power. This was a period where the Vikings were more than marauders. They were rulers of a vast, interconnected realm. However, the mightiest of empires can crumble, leaving behind only stories of their former greatness and the enduring myth of their legendary rulers. Harald Hardrada, remembered as perhaps the most warlike Viking king in history, stands immortalised in the sagas and chronicles alike. To many, Harald was a legendary warrior king, a hero of unparalleled ferocity and renown. To others, he was the most reviled of villains. His name, Hardrada, meaning stern counsel or hard ruler, was just one of his fearsome epithets. Harald's life was a tapestry woven with blood and thunder. His first battle fought at the tender age of just 15. His sword saw action across the known world, from the bitterly cold realms of Scandinavia to the sun-baked coasts of the Mediterranean, from the ancient lands of Asia Minor and Sicily to the sacred Holy Land, and from the Balkans to the great city of Constantinople. Harald had seen most of the known world with his own eyes, finally clashing in the fields of England. The words of the chronicler Adam of Bremen, refer to Harald as a cold-blooded warlord. In Norway, great events took place at that time. King Harald surpassed all the madness of the tyrants in his savage wildness. Many churches were destroyed by that man. Many Christians were tortured to death by him. But he was a mighty man, and renowned for his victories he had previously won in many wars with barbarians in Greece and in the Scythian regions. After he came into his fatherland, however, he never ceased from warfare. He was the thunderbolt of the north, a pestilence to all. Today, Harald is revered for his warrior spirit, his saga echoing the grandeur of an epic fantasy tale, except the life of this man was very real. His legacy is one of glory, victory, and conquest. Yet his end would also mark the twilight of an era when the Vikings cast a long shadow of terror across the world. This is the epic story of Harald Hardrada. Harald was born in Norway in the year 1015. His father, Sigurd Syr, was the petty king of Ringerike, rumoured to be the great-grandson of Harald Fairhair, the first king of Norway. According to the Heimskringla saga, Sigurd Syr was a very prudent and modest man, yet very wealthy, owning many large farms. Harald's mother was named Asta Gudbrandsdatter, and she had a son from her first marriage named Olaf, who was 20 years older than Harald and was the king of Norway by the time Harald was born, making Harald half-brothers with the king. Harald would also have two full older brothers named Guthorm and Halfdan. In his youth, Harald exhibited traits of a rebellious spirit with grand ambitions, looking up to his half-brother Olaf as a role model. This set him apart from his two older brothers, who were more akin to their father, practical and primarily concerned with the upkeep of the farm. Thus, Harald grew up during the reign of his older brother, immersed in the tales of Olaf's expeditions. As a teen, Olaf had been a mercenary fighting for England's king, Ethelred the Unready. Harald would hear about Olaf's exploits, sailing his longships up the River Thames to London Bridge, overpowering Prince Canute, and ultimately claiming his ancestral throne of Norway. As the youngest son, Harald lived in the shadow of his elder siblings, yet his spirit was restless, and the last son would do anything to prove himself. It was said that when Harald was aged 3, Olaf came to visit his royal estate at Ringerike. There, Asta presented Harald and his two elder brothers Guthorm and Halfdan to the king. When Olaf took the older boys on his knee, they cast their gaze down before him, but when he did the same to Harald, the lad looked him straight in the eye, and when Olaf tugged his hair, Harald tugged the king's moustache, and Olaf told him, "One day, kinsman, you will be a fighter." The Icelandic poet Snorri Sturluson also wrote this in an episode regarding a young Harald and his brothers. King Olaf called Guthorm and Halfdan to him, and he asked Guthorm, "What do you want most?" Guthorm said, "A cornfield, the whole field over there, jutting out into the lake." "That would be a lot of corn there," said the king. Then the king asked Halfdan, "And what would you most like to have?" Halfdan said, "Cows, so many that when they go down to drink, they'll all stand round the lake side by side." "That would be a very big farm," said the king. Then the king finally said to Harald, "And what would you want most of all?" "Soldiers," said Harald, "so many that they will eat all of Halfdan's cows at one meal." The king laughed and said, "You're bringing up a king here, mother." Both tales reflect how Olaf recognised his younger brother Harald as a future king and warrior, foreshadowing what would become of him. Harald's half-brother Olaf admired how the Frankish Emperor Charlemagne had used Christianity to unite his realm. After his baptism and return to Norway, Olaf embarked on a mission to convert the largely pagan country, resorting to maiming, blinding, or killing to achieve his aims. He imported bishops from England, Normandy, and Germany, and sought to enforce Christianity in the inland areas, which had the least communication with the rest of Europe. The pagan temples of old were torn down, and atop their ruins churches were built. Any who tried to intervene were ruthlessly cut down, in the name of the new god. However, this extreme religious devotion alienated his nobles. They began to view Olaf as a fanatic who disrespected the religion of their ancestors, prompting them to invite Canute, the reigning king of both Denmark and England, to annex Norway into his North Sea Empire. The Norse kings often traced their lineage back to Odin, and Olaf's dream of converting all of his subjects to Christianity led his jarls and lords, many of whom still believing in the old gods, to turn against him. Consequently, Olaf was forced into exile in Russia. During his exile, Canute installed Hakon Sigurdsson, the Jarl of Lade, as the governor of Norway. However, just 1 year into his rule over Norway, Hakon drowned and died at sea. Olaf, from his exile in Russia, would then prepare for a military expedition to reclaim the throne. Olaf was supported by the Swedish king Canute Jacob, who wanted to weaken Canute's power. He provided Olaf with 400 men and guides to see him safely escorted into Norway. Olaf's exile was undoubtedly difficult for Harald. His older brother had been king for as long as he could remember, and Harald saw Olaf as a man of action and a hero. Upon hearing of Olaf's movements, Harald faced a crucial decision: to sit out of the upcoming war or become one of its key warriors. Restless as ever, Harald gathered 600 men from the uplands to join Olaf and his forces. After a warm welcome, Olaf went on to amass a larger army, leading to the Battle of Stiklestad on July the 29th in the year 1030, where Harald would fight alongside his brother. This battle was part of an effort to restore Olaf to the Norwegian throne, which had been seized by the Danish king Canute the Great. According to the sources, Olaf led his 3,600-man army through Sweden, crossing the mountains into the valley of Verdal, about 80 kilometers north of Trondheim. They arrived at Stiklestad, a farm in the lower part of the valley, where the legendary battle unfolded, as chronicled by Snorri Sturluson in his renowned work the Heimskringla, written 2 centuries later. Although Canute was absent from Norway, his cause was defended by the so-called Farmer Army, a force of jarls, chieftains and villagers loyal to him. Harald, just 15 years old at the time, joined his brother in battle, eager to drench his sword in the blood of his enemies. Leading his contingent of men, Harald, despite his brother's wishes, plunged into the carnage and clashed with the peasant army at Stiklestad. One scout wrote this about Harald's role in the battle: "I heard the Lord was hard pressed in battle, but Harald fought well for his brother." However, fate did not favour Harald and Olaf that day. According to the sagas, Olaf fought valiantly, killing many warriors, but was ultimately mortally wounded. He suffered an axe blow to the knee, a sword slice to the neck, and a fatal spear thrust beneath his mail shirt entered his belly. With the king's death, his army lost hope and dispersed, leaving Canute as the undisputed ruler of Norway and his North Sea Empire. Harald, who had fought willfully for his brother and king, was also severely wounded. His first taste of battle was one of crushing defeat, and it also nearly cost him his life. Harald was nonetheless remarked to have shown considerable courage and military talent during the battle, even being on the left flank of the legendary boar snout tactic, a wedge formation used to break through enemy lines. After the defeat at the Battle of Stiklestad, Harald, aided by one of his noblemen, managed to escape to a remote house of a peasant deep within a forest in eastern Norway. Once the younger brother of the King of Norway, Harald, now battle-worn and wounded, lived in exile, dependent on the mercy of a common man. The peasant, unaware of Harald's true identity, concealed him and diligently tended to his wounds, simply driven by the desire to heal the injured boy. While Harald rode with the man between two uninhabited forests, Harald made these verses. My wounds were bleeding as I rode, and down below the bonds strode, killing the wounded with the sword, the followers of their rightful lord. From wood to wood I crept along, unnoticed by the bond throng. Who knows, I thought a day may come, my name will yet be great at home. Once Harald was healed and strong enough to travel, he ventured north over the mountains to Sweden, eventually making his way to the Kievan Rus. There, he was welcomed by Grand Prince Yaroslav the Wise, whose wife Iningerd was a distant relative of Harald. Yaroslav, in dire need of military leaders, recognized Harald's potential and appointed him as the captain of his forces. Harald's brother Olaf Haraldsson had previously sought refuge with Yaroslav, following the revolt in 1028. According to the saga of old kings, Yaroslav only embraced Harald because he was Olaf's brother. Harald participated in Yaroslav's campaign against the Poles in the year 1031, and possibly fought against other enemies and rivals of the Kievan Rus in the 1030s, including the Estonians, the Byzantines, and the Pechenegs, as well as various other nomadic peoples. The skald Bolverk sung this song about Harald's time in Russia. The king's sharp sword lies clean and bright, prepared in foreign lands to fight. Our ravens croak to have their fill, the wolf howls from the distant hill. Our brave king is to Russia gone, braver than he on earth there's none. His sharp sword will carve many a feast, to wolf and raven in the east. Harald is said to have remained in Russia for several years, journeying far and wide across the vast eastern lands. His restless spirit eventually spurred him to embark on an expedition to Greece, ultimately setting his sights on the legendary city of Constantinople, once the grand capital of the Roman Empire. From the mid-5th century to the early 13th century, Constantinople stood as the largest and wealthiest city in Europe, widely regarded as the centre and cradle of Orthodox Christian civilization. As an exiled prince, Harald was still haunted by the shadow of Canute the Great, the ruler of England, Denmark, and Norway. As the brother of the slain King Olaf, Harald was a marked man, and returning to Scandinavia would have been suicide. Therefore, he sought another path to wealth and glory. Constantinople, with its golden domes and bustling markets, offered him the opportunity to carve out a new destiny. The city, known as Miklagard to the Norse, was a marvel of the medieval world, its streets full of traders, soldiers and scholars from across the globe. By the time Harald was fully grown, he was described as being a giant of the age. Snorri Sturluson has pictured him having light hair and a beard, a long moustache, and that one of his eyebrows was somewhat higher than the other. Harald is also described as having been physically larger and stronger than other men, with big hands and feet. Harald and his contingent of around 500 men arrived in Constantinople, likely in the year 1033 or 1034, where they joined the prestigious Varangian Guard. While the Flatterjabok suggests that Harald initially sought to conceal his royal identity, most sources concur that Harald and his men were already renowned in the east by this time. The Byzantine Empire was then ruled by Empress Zoe the Great, alongside Emperor Michael IV, the Paphlagonian. Upon Harald's arrival in Constantinople, he presented himself to the Empress within the opulent halls of her great palace. Empress Zoe, immediately impressed by Harald's formidable presence and reputation, took him into her service without hesitation. The Varangian Guard was not merely a ceremonial unit, but a crucial element in the Byzantine military might. They provided unwavering security for the emperors and played decisive roles in many wars, often being deployed at crucial moments of battle. Constantinople, with its towering walls and splendid domes, was a stark contrast to Harald's homeland of Norway. Harald quickly adapted to his new environment, his strategic acumen and combat prowess earning him a prominent position within the Varangian Guard. His service under Empress Zoe saw him participating in various military campaigns where his leadership and valour were consistently displayed. Harald's role in these campaigns further enhanced his reputation, with tales of his exploits spreading far and wide. According to Harald's saga, this is what transpired during his time in the Varangian Guard. Harald boarded the galleys which were manned with troops heading out to the Greek Sea. He brought his own men along with him. Despite being new to the army, Harald quickly garnered the loyalty of all the Varangians, who rallied to him in battle. As a result, Harald was soon appointed as the chief of the Varangians. He would travel around the Greek islands, engaging in numerous battles against the Corsairs, distinguishing himself and even earning a more fearsome reputation than he already had. In the summer, the entire Varangian army embarked on a campaign to Sörkland, which means Saracen land, which would have been in North Africa. During these battles, Harald strategically kept his men out of the fray or away from the least dangerous areas, under the pretext of preserving the contingents of his strength. However, when alone with his own men, Harald fought with such ferocity that he would either emerge victorious, or he and his men would die trying. However, they never did. Consequently, whenever Harald led his army, they often secured victories. Many soldiers noticed the disparity and began to believe that they would fare far better if Harald was the sole commander of the entire army. A few brave Greeks, driven by the desire for wealth and glory, joined Harald and accepted him as their leader. Harald would spend many years in northern Africa, during which he amassed a vast fortune in gold, jewels, and other precious treasures. All the wealth he accumulated was beyond what was necessary for his immediate needs, so he entrusted much of his gold hoard to reliable men who transported it north to Novgorod, placing it under the care and protection of King Yaroslav, who Harald had fought for previously as the captain of his forces. During Harald's exploits in Africa fighting the Fatimid Caliphate, he would capture 80 Arab strongholds through sheer valour. Although this number is probably inflated, these raids contributed to his immense wealth, and these feats were not mere legends, but truths that showcased his prowess and brilliance. One such episode in Sicily recounts Harald's military genius. When Harald arrived in Sicily, he continued his campaign of plunder, eventually laying siege to a formidable and populous castle. Surrounding the castle with his army, he quickly realized that its thick walls were impenetrable, and the defenders had ample provisions and supplies for a prolonged defense. Faced with this challenge, Harald devised a clever strategy. He instructed his bird catchers to capture small birds that nested within the castle, but flew into the woods by day to gather food for their young. Harald had small splinters of tarred wood bound to the birds' backs, which were then smeared with wax and sulphur to set it alight. Once released, the birds instinctively flew back to their nests within the castle, which were tucked under the roofs made of reeds and straw. As the birds returned to their nests, the flames they carried ignited the roofs. Although each bird only carried a small ember, the collective effect was catastrophic. The fire spread rapidly from one house to the next, ultimately engulfing the entire castle in flames. Overwhelmed by this, the defenders who had previously defied the Greek army and its leader for days were forced to abandon their stronghold and plead for mercy. Harald, demonstrating his strategic brilliance, granted life and safety to all those who submitted. In doing so, he took control of the castle, achieving victory through ingenuity rather than brute force. Harald would also make himself the master of the castle for a time. There was yet another formidable castle that Harald's army came upon, heavily populated and seemingly impregnable. The castle stood on a flat, hard plain, offering no hope of breaking through its defences directly. Harald then devised a cunning plan. He would dig a tunnel from a location where a stream ran in a deep bed, hidden from the castle's view. Harald's men worked tirelessly day and night digging the passage. They discarded the excavated earth into the stream, allowing the water to carry it and thus conceal their efforts. The army continuing to engage the castle defenders, engaging in bouts of archery exchange, and resting at night. Once Harald judged the tunnel long enough to reach beneath the castle walls, he ordered his men to arm themselves and prepare for an assault. Near daybreak, they entered the passage, digging upwards. When they reached the very end, they struck stones set in lime, the floor of a stone hall. Breaking through, they emerged into the hall, where many castle inhabitants were eating and drinking, completely unsuspecting of the imminent threat. The Varangians would launch a swift and brutal attack, swords in hand, killing several of the startled defenders. Those who managed to escape the initial onslaught fled, but the Varangians pursued them relentlessly. Some of Harald's men seized the castle gate, opening it, and allowed the rest of the army to pour in. The castle's inhabitants, overwhelmed by the sudden and fierce assault, fled in panic. Many sought mercy from Harald's troops, and quarter was granted to all who surrendered. Harald thus secured possession of another castle, uncovering an immense booty within its walls. Harald had spent many years campaigning in Serkland and in Sicily, where he amassed wealth and gained renown through his numerous conquests. Upon returning to Constantinople with his troops, he remained briefly before embarking on an expedition to Jerusalem. Legend has it that during these campaigns, Harald fought in 18 significant battles, each testing his skill and valor as a warrior. His exploits during this time further solidified his reputation as a formidable leader and commander. He journeyed with his men to the land of Jerusalem, pressing onward into the city itself. Wherever they ventured in the region, people would willingly surrender their forces. One skald recounted this about Harald's time in the Holy Land. He went the warrior bold and brave, Jerusalem, the holy grave, and the interior of the land, to bring under the Greeks' command, and by terror of his name, under his power the country came, nor needing wasting fire and sword, to yield obedience to his word. It is recounted that many Saracens in this land submitted peacefully to Harald's authority, without the need for warfare or devastation. Harald proceeded to journey to the Jordan River, where he participated in the customary bathing rituals observed by the pilgrims. Moreover, Harald would undertake the task of securing an entire route leading to the Jordan River. He achieved this by confronting and eliminating many robbers and disruptors of the peace, thereby ensuring safe passage for pilgrims and travellers for a time. Harald returned to Constantinople in the year 1038. However, following the conclusion of the Byzantine campaign in Sicily, a revolt led by the Lombard Norman forces erupted in southern Italy. Harald, commanding the Varangian Guard, engaged them in several battles during this tumultuous period. Among these conflicts were the battles of Olivento and Montemagior, where Harald confronted the Norman adventurer William Ironarm. These engagements proved challenging for Harald, resulting in defeats at the hands of the skilled Norman commander. After the defeats, Harald and the Varangian Guard were called back to Constantinople. In the year 1041, Emperor Michael himself embarked towards Bulgaria, leading a formidable army of 40,000 soldiers, bolstered by the Norse mercenaries, among whom was Harald. With bold aggression, Michael pressed his forces into Bulgaria. Aided by Harald, they fought together in the pivotal Battle of Ostrovo. The backdrop to this conflict stemmed from Peter Dalen's uprising against the Byzantines in the year 1040, claiming the Bulgarian throne in defiance. His ascendancy was short-lived, however, as his cousin betrayed him, which led to Peter's blinding and subsequent defeat near Ostrovo the following year. Despite his blindness, Peter remained a formidable leader, commanding his forces against the Byzantine army. The campaign would take its toll on Emperor Michael, pushing him to the brink of death. Yet he managed to return triumphant to Constantinople alongside Harald. Despite their victory, the emperor's health deteriorated rapidly, signalling his imminent demise. Following Michael IV's death in the year 1041, turmoil ensued at court, as Michael V and Empress Zoe vied for power, leading to a decline in Harald's influence at the imperial court. After nearly a decade traversing foreign lands and battling in distant realms, Harald's heart ached with an insatiable longing to return to the rugged, familial landscapes of the north, to his cherished homeland. The lure of the fjords, the dense forests, and the crisp, invigorating air of Norway stirred deep within him. It was a call he could no longer ignore. News would reach Harald that his nephew Magnus Olafsson, the son of his older brother King Olaf, had not only claimed the throne of Norway, but also extended his dominion over Denmark. This revelation struck a chord with Harald, igniting a desire to reunite with his kin and support his family's legacy. The dual crowns of Norway and Denmark, resting upon the head of his brother's son, presented a powerful draw. Harald, battle-hardened and extremely wealthy, imagined to himself what it would be like to be king. With this newfound knowledge, Harald resolved to step down from his prestigious position within the Byzantine army. The decision was not made lightly, for his role had been one of significant command and respect. Yet the call of his homeland, coupled with the rise of his nephew, made the choice clear. His tenure in the Byzantine Empire, marked by valour and leadership, was to be relinquished in favour of a new quest, a quest for his ancestral throne. When the Empress Zoe was informed of Harald's intentions, she became enraged and accused him of defrauding the Emperor of his treasure, which had been entrusted to him during his military campaigns. Adding to the complexity of the situation, Harald had courted a young and beautiful girl named Maria, who was the niece of Empress Zoe. Despite his advances, the Empress had refused his proposal, as Zoe wanted to marry Harald herself. There were also rumours that the Empress and Harald were lovers, adding further political intrigue and complexities to the situation. Michael V was the reigning Emperor of the Byzantines, sharing the throne with Empress Zoe, who still wielded considerable power. This was a period marked by intense political turmoil within the magnificent city of Constantinople. Accusations flew as Empress Zoe was implicated in a plot to poison her co-ruler, further destabilizing an already volatile situation. In the midst of this political chaos, Harald, at the height of his power and influence, was arrested and thrown into prison. Renowned for his battle prowess and respected throughout the court, he had once enjoyed the Empress's favour, despite their disagreements over personal matters. It was widely whispered in the shadowed halls of the Byzantine court, that Emperor Michael V harboured a profound and consuming fear of Harald. This fear was not without reason, for Harald was a man of formidable presence and restless in spirit. His unwavering loyalty to the previous emperor had secured his significant standing among the courtiers. Commanding the fierce Varangian Guard, Harald's reputation was unparalleled. These elite warriors sworn to protect the emperor followed Harald with a relationship born of respect and fear. Harald's legend had also spread far beyond the confines of Byzantium, reaching the furthest corners of Europe. He was the Norse warrior prince, the exiled heir who had lost his ancestral lands, yet refused to be defeated. Through sheer will and unmatched prowess, he had not only survived, but flourished. His tales of valour and perseverance echoed through the halls of power, filling the hearts of those who heard them with admiration. In Michael V's eyes, Harald was a living symbol of resilience and strength, a constant reminder of his own vulnerabilities. The Emperor's fear was a shadow that loomed large, growing even darker with each whispered tale of Harald's exploits. Due to this, the Emperor had Harald arrested and thrown into prison. His fate was now at a crossroads. Michael V then decided to banish Empress Zoe and declared himself the sole ruler, believing this move would solidify his power. Yet, this was far from the end for Harald and Zoe. Michael's proclamation incited a massive uprising among the common folk, who surrounded the palace in a mob, demanding Zoe's immediate restoration to power. The call of the masses was heeded, and Zoe was reinstated. The city, however, descended into chaos, and the populace, inflamed with anger, attacked the palace from multiple directions. The Emperor's soldiers fought valiantly. The conflict had claimed an estimated 3,000 lives on both sides, and amid the turmoil of the riots, the Varangian Guard, ever loyal to Harald, seized this opportunity to free him from his prison. On that day, fate smiled upon Harald, guiding him through the chaos to freedom, giving him another chance to reclaim his destiny. Harald would move with swift purpose to the quarters of the Varangians, his presence commanding immediate respect and allegiance. As he entered the room, every warrior rose from their seats, their faces lighting up with joy and respect at the sight of their revered leader. Harald led them with resolve through the darkened corridors of the palace. As they approached the Emperor's chambers, where the ruler lay asleep, unaware of the imminent danger, the Varangians entered silently. They then seized the Emperor, who awoke to the grim realization of his fate. Harald was bitterly angry due to his unjust imprisonment, the betrayal after years of unwavering loyalty and service to the Byzantine Empire. Due to this, Harald personally blinded the Emperor, a reflection of his ferocious nature and the depths of his wrath. The Emperor was then sent to a monastery and would spend the remaining of his days in disgrace and isolation. Following Zoe's restoration to the throne in June of the year 1042, Harald sought permission to return to his beloved Norway. His heart yearned for the rugged fjords and familial shores of his homeland. However, Empress Zoe, captivated by Harald and unwilling to part with her lover, denied his request. She desired to keep him close, attempting to control him through every means at her disposal. Her court was a gilded cage, and she was determined to bind him within it. Resolute in his desire to return to Norway, Harald began to craft a daring plan of escape. He would gather loyal companions, men who shared his yearning for the open sea and the distant northern lands. Together, they conspired in secret, whispering their plans in hushed tones, always wary of Zoe's spies. On that fateful night, King Harald and his loyal men stealthily approached the residence where the beautiful Maria slept. She was said to be the woman who Harald actually loved, but was denied by the Empress. With swift and forceful precision, they carried her away into the night, the air thick with the urgency of their mission. Their destination was the shoreline, where the mighty galleys of the Varangians lay in wait. As the night draped its cloak over the city of Constantinople, Harald, the Norse prince, embarked on a daring escape. With 2 ships and a band of fiercely loyal followers, Harald navigated the treacherous waters of the Bosphorus. The first ship, guided by Harald's expert hand, deftly evaded detection as they slipped past the Byzantine patrols. However, as Harald's ship approached the barrier, his voice would boom across the deck, rallying his men into action. With a unified effort, they surged forward, their muscles straining against the resistance of the chains. The ship groaned in protest, but Harald's determination was unshakable. With a final surge of strength and defiance, they breached the barrier, the ship lurching forward and sailing into the open expanse of the Black Sea. Before fully departing from the Byzantine lands, Harald shared one final night with his love Maria, and in a moment of chivalry, he put Maria ashore, ensuring she was accompanied by a strong escort back to Constantinople. His message to her was clear and defiant. She was to tell her kinswoman, the Empress Zoe, of Harald's new quest for the throne of Norway and the futility of any attempts to control him. With the wind at his back, Harald set sail northwards. His daring escape and bold defiance were etched into the annals of legend, again adding to his reputation. Harald, the Norse prince, had amassed vast riches during his years in the opulent courts of Constantinople. The gleaming treasures of the Byzantine Empire flowed into his hands like rivers of gold. These riches were not hoarded in vanity, but wisely dispatched to the distant Kievan Rus, there under the valiant guardsmanship of Yaroslav the Wise, who stored the riches safely. Upon his triumphant return to the Kievan Rus, Harald's presence resonated like thunder across the land. His alliance with Yaroslav was sealed through a marriage to his daughter Elizabeth. She was the daughter of the wise ruler and the granddaughter of Swedish royalty. This solidified Harald's position as a formidable player in the intricate Game of Thrones, which he now wished to play. Their union was not merely of love and lineage, but of strategic alliance. Harald's journey from the frozen fjords of Norway to the sun-kissed shores of the Mediterranean had been one of daring escapes, epic conquests, and much battle. Harald's repute was fearsome all over Europe, and his nephew Magnus would soon learn of his intention to return to Norway. Harald embarked on his westward journey from Novgorod in the early months of the year 1045. Meanwhile in Norway, the throne had been claimed by his nephew. The political landscape shifted as Harald's ambition intersected with the tumultuous history of dynastic struggles. The sons of Canute the Great, once contenders for the throne of Norway, had turned their sights towards England, leaving Magnus to consolidate his reign unopposed. With the Danish throne left vacant by Harthacnut's passing, Magnus would seize this opportunity to expand his domain, quelling pretenders and securing his authority over Denmark. It was amidst this backdrop of shifting alliances and territorial ambitions that Harald, driven by fate and a thirst for power, he joined forces with Sweyn Estridsson, his nephew and fellow exile, and they would make oaths to each other and forged a friendship. Together, they sought refuge and forged alliances with Anud Jacob, the King of Sweden, pooling their strength to challenge Magnus's empire. Harald and his allies raided the Danish coast with ferocity, daring the locals to defy Magnus's rule. As news of Harald and Sweyn's exploits reached Magnus's ears, the young king, wise beyond his years, recognized the imminent threat to his sovereignty. With resolve and tempered by caution, Magnus marshalled his forces and returned swiftly to Norway. Magnus's advisors counselled against open warfare with his uncle, urging instead to a path of negotiation and compromise, fearing the reputation of the man who was now known as the Thunderbolt of the North. In the summer of the year 1046, a treaty was forged. King Magnus commanded the trumpets to herald the assembly of a general thing, where the kings of Norway were historically crowned. The people gathered solemnly, their faces turned towards the king, eager to hear his proclamation. With a voice that carried authority and conviction, Magnus addressed the assembled army, revealing the generous gift he had bestowed upon his kinsman, Harald. Amidst the murmurs of approval and admiration, Thorir of Steg, a respected figure among the warriors, conferred upon Harald the title of king. The air crackled with anticipation as the mantle of kingship settled upon Harald's shoulders, his gaze steady and resolute. Later the same day, a feast of unparalleled splendour unfolded within King Harald's land tent. Harald extended a gracious invitation to Magnus, who arrived with 60 of his men, their armour gleaming in the sunlight. Upon a high seat, adorned with rich tapestries and intricate carvings, the two kings sat side by side, their laughter ringing out amidst the melodies of harp and song. King Harald would soon order a procession of caskets and chests into the tent, and with solemn ceremony, the treasures of distant shores were unveiled before Magnus and his men. Weapons forged in foreign fires, garments of silk and fur, and ornaments of rare jewels that sparkled like captured starlight. With a voice that carried both gratitude and pride, Harald spoke to Magnus, his words echoing with the weight of a shared history and ambition. He acknowledged Magnus's generosity in granting him a kingdom, hard won from their mutual foes, and said this to his nephew: "Yesterday, you bestowed upon us a realm that stands testament to your valour and wisdom. Today, we offer you the spoils of our journeys across foreign seas, gathered with peril and perseverance. Let these treasures be a symbol of our unity and mutual respect. As we share the rule of Norway, so too shall we share in the riches that bind us together." Thus, the bond between Harald and Magnus was reaffirmed. Despite their shared dominion, Harald and Magnus's relationship began to falter due to numerous disagreements. Their separate courts echoed with whispers of rivalry and ambition, their meetings tinged with the threat of physical confrontations, with the two men nearly coming to blows on several occasions. Yet amidst the simmering discord, they upheld a fragile peace. In the year 1047, Magnus would die without an heir, still young. Before his death, however, he decided that Sweyn was to inherit Denmark, and Harald to inherit the entirety of Norway. Denmark was Sweyn's ancestral seat, with his mother being the sister of Canute the Great, and with his father being Ulf Jarl, a formidable Danish chief, and the regent of Denmark for a time. Upon hearing of Magnus's death, Sweyn is reported to have said, "Now so help me God, I shall never yield Denmark." Harald, with a heart aflame with ambition, and a vision that stretched across the vast expanse of the North Sea, harboured not only the desire to uphold Magnus's dominion over Denmark, but also reclaim it from his old ally Sweyn. Sweyn's grip on Denmark stood as a formidable obstacle to Harald's vision of a unified Scandinavia, and perhaps the restoration of Canute the Great's legendary North Sea Empire in its entirety, craving the power of an old king, that had defeated his older brother in battle. At the age of 33, Harald Hardrada unleashed his wrath upon Denmark, marking the beginning of a bloody and relentless campaign. In the year 1048, he descended upon Jutland, plundering its lands with a savagery that sent shivers through the heart of Scandinavia. The following year, his bloodlust led him to Hedeby, the jewel of Danish trade, and one of the best protected towns in all Scandinavia. With torches blazing and swords gleaming under the sun's harsh glare, Harald's warriors tore through the city. The town's defences crumbled before the Norse onslaught, its streets running red with the blood of the defenders and civilians alike. Flames licked the sky as homes, markets and ships were consumed by the inferno. The once thriving hub of commerce and culture reduced to smouldering ruins. Later that same year, amidst the charred remnants of Hedeby's former glory, a clash of kings was destined to unfold. Harald and Sweyn, two titans of the north, prepared to face each other in a rare conventional battle of the era. According to the chronicler Saxo Grammaticus, the mere sight of Harald's approaching forces struck terror into the hearts of Sweyn's smaller army. Panic spread like wildfire, and in their desperation, Sweyn's men chose to fling themselves into the cold embrace of the sea, rather than face the Norse berserkers, a reflection of the overwhelming fear Harald inspired. Although Harald was victorious in most of the engagements, he was never fully successful in occupying the entirety of Denmark. It was of the universal opinion that no chief ever was in northern lands of such deep judgment and ready counsel as Harald. He was a great warrior, bold in arms, strong and expert in the use of all weapons, and was also a great friend to all the people of Norway. The seasons improved when Harald ascended the throne, an omen to the common folk that his rule was just. Harald had been all over the world, and as well as being a military man, he had a deep-rooted understanding of currency. He developed a Norwegian currency and a viable coin economy, which in turn allowed Norway to participate in international trade. He initiated trade with the Kievan Rus and the Byzantine Empire through his connections, as well as with Scotland and Ireland. According to the later sagas, Harald founded Oslo, which today is the capital and most populated city in Norway, where he spent much time. Harald, having secured his kingship through sheer force and reputation, would face the formidable task of convincing the Norwegian aristocracy of his right to rule alone. His primary opposition came from the powerful descendants of Hakon Sigurdsson, known as Hakon the Powerful, famed for his victory over the Joms Vikings in a legendary sea battle, and he was also thought to be descended from giants or Ivar the Boneless. With this influential lineage, the Earls of Lade had long controlled northern Norway, and Trondelag with considerable autonomy under the Norwegian crown. Hakon the Powerful had even ruled the entirety of Norway from the years 975 to the year 995, albeit nominally under the Danish king, until his demise during Olaf Tryggvason's takeover. Despite Hakon's death, his descendants continued to wield significant influence in the north. By the time Harald ascended to the throne, the family's authority was embodied by Einar Endridason, a powerful warlord and one of the wealthiest men in the realm, who was married to Hakon's daughter, cementing their legacy. Einar, as well as being a wealthy and powerful man, was popular and is well celebrated in the sagas, being described as incredibly strong. While the Earls of Lade had maintained a cooperative relationship with Magnus, Harald's insistence on absolute rule and consolidation of power soon ignited conflict with Einar. The tension between Harald's centralizing ambitions and the traditional autonomy of the Lade family set the stage for a power struggle that would shape the future of Norway. It was from his fierce power struggle with the Norwegian aristocracy that Harald earned the formidable nickname Hardrada, meaning the hard ruler. The relationship between Harald and Einar was strained from the beginning, but open confrontation was avoided until Einar journeyed to Harald's court. During one tense occasion, Einar arrived at Harald's court, making a bold display of power. He was accompanied by 8 or 9 huge longships and nearly 500 men, clearly prepared for a confrontation. This show of force highlighted the simmering tensions that foreshadowed the inevitable clash between Harald and the powerful Earl. According to Harald's saga, one fateful day, a meeting was held in the town, with the king himself in attendance. A thief had been apprehended and brought before the assembly. The man had previously served Einar, who held him in high regard. When Einar heard of the man's plight, he knew the king would show him no mercy, especially since Einar had an interest in the case. Determined to save the man, Einar armed his followers and marched to the assembly. There, he seized the thief by force. Friends and mediators intervened, managing to arrange a reconciliation meeting between the Earl and the king. They agreed to convene at the king's house. The king, with a select few, entered a private room, while most of his men remained outside in the courtyard. The king had the shutters adjusted so none could see in and out of the building. Einar would soon arrive with his men, and instructed his son to stay outside with the troops, confident that no harm would come to him inside. As Einar entered the darkened room, he remarked on the dimness. In that instant, assailants rushed at him, armed with spears and swords. Hearing the commotion, his son drew his sword and charged into the room, only to be slain alongside his father Einar. The king's men quickly barred the door, leaving Einar's men leaderless and hesitant. Then King Harald emerged from the house, organised his men into battle formation, and raised his standard. The enemy Norsemen, now leaderless, dare not attack, for they knew the king's fearsomeness. Harald's actions had left him despised by many, for the Earls of Lade had long been held in high regard by the Norwegians. Earl Einar, around 70 years old when he was assassinated, had been a revered figure. The country was on the brink of rebellion, and it was only the absence of a unifying leader that prevented an uprising against the king. The remaining descendants of Hakon Sigurdsson did contemplate rebellion, but Harald, displaying both cunning and diplomatic skill, eventually managed to negotiate peace with them. He secured the family's submission, ensuring their loyalty for the remainder of his reign. By the time of Einar and his son's deaths in around the year 1050, the Earls of Lade had lost their influence as a focal point of opposition. Trondelag, once a stronghold of resistance, was now firmly subordinated to Harald's national kingdom. His dominance was solidified, and the realm was unified under his hard, unyielding rule. By the year 1062, Harald, now at the height of his power, decided to construct a ship of unparalleled grandeur. This magnificent vessel would rival the legendary Long Serpent, the most renowned Viking longship ever to sail the seas, belonging to King Olaf Tryggvason. Harald's warship was adorned with a dragon head prow and a dragon tail stern, with the ship's bows gilded to gleam in the sunlight. The ship boasted 35 rowing benches, making it impressively large and remarkably handsome. Every aspect of the ship's equipment was of the highest quality, from the sails and rigging to the anchors and cables. In the winter, King Harald dispatched a message south to King Sweyn of Denmark, challenging him to come north in the spring. They were to meet at the Gaut River for a decisive battle to To settle their rivalry once and for all, the victor would claim both kingdoms, consolidating power and dominion over their realms. According to the Icelandic saga writer Snorri Sturluson, a grand battle had been prearranged between Harald and Sweyn, set for a specific time and place. However, when the appointed moment arrived, Sweyn was nowhere to be seen. Assuming his adversary had forfeited, Harald dismissed his non-professional peasant army, which comprised roughly half of his forces. No sooner had these ships vanished from sight than Sweyn appeared, launching a surprise attack on Harald's now diminished fleet. In a strategic move, Harald lashed his ships together to form an unbroken line, placing his flagship at the centre. He stationed Earl Hakon Ivarsson and his Trondelag forces on the flanks. Sweyn mirrored this tactic, but kept his own earl close by. As dusk fell, the two fleets clashed in a fierce and relentless battle that raged through into the night. For hours, the conflict seemed evenly matched. Then Hakon skillfully disengaged his ships from the flanks, launching a devastating attack on the weakened Danish vessels. Without a reserve force, Sweyn's fleet crumbled by dawn as Harald's men boarded his ships, leaving 70 ships full of corpses and the rest retreating in disarray. King Sweyn leaped into the water and would manage to escape the battle, reaching land and stopped at the house of a peasant to ask for something to eat. Though Harald emerged victorious, the win was far from decisive. Many Danish ships and men, including Sweyn, would manage to escape. The protracted conflict had ravaged Denmark's economic and social structure, but Norway's as well. After the Battle of Nissa, Harald would face difficulties in collecting taxes in the uplands and other regions, with the farmers being sick of funding wars which held no economic reward. By the year 1064, weary by years of relentless conflict, Harald extended an olive branch to Sweyn, offering unconditional peace, with no demands for reparations or territorial concessions. The two kings, battle-worn and scarred, agreed to this truce, bringing a merciful end to the devastating war. They once again swore oaths of fealty to each other, reminiscent of the vows they had exchanged before ascending to their thrones. Thus, after nearly 14 years of unceasing warfare, there was finally a hard-won peace between the once feuding monarchs. Accepting that Denmark could not be conquered, Harald shifted his focus to England. His claim was rooted in the agreement in the year 1038 between his nephew Magnus and Hardrada, the previous ruler of England, who died childless in the year 1042. Their pact stipulated that if either monarch were to die, the surviving ruler would inherit his lands. Hardrada ruled England and Denmark. Thus Harald sought England as his rightful inheritance from Magnus. However, Hardrada had favoured his half-brother Edward the Confessor, who ascended the English throne with the powerful support of Earl Godwin, the father of Harold Godwinson. Magnus's plans to invade England in the year 1045 were set aside as he contended with the uprising led by Sweyn of Denmark, and when Magnus passed away in the year 1047, Harold inherited his claim to the English throne. Edward the Confessor, meanwhile, shrewdly kept potential adversaries at bay by subtly implying that they might succeed him, ensuring a fragile balance of power. However, by the year 1066, Edward the Confessor would lay on his deathbed, and the fate of England hung in the balance. News of Edward's coma and eventual death would spread all over Europe. This would trigger a flurry of claims to the throne. Edward, in his final moments, entrusted the kingdom to Harold Godwinson, his most formidable earl, setting the stage for a powerful struggle between giants of the age. Among the claimants to the English throne was Edgar the Etheling, his lineage tracing back to Alfred the Great. Despite lacking lands, armies or powerful allies, beyond the late King Edward himself, Edgar's claim resonated deeply on the grounds of blood and heritage. Contrasting Edgar's hereditary right was Harald Godwinson, already entrusted as the regent on Edward's deathbed. He was the mightiest lord in England. His influence pervaded every corner of the kingdom, his renown as a battle commander eclipsing any other. Yet, from the icy waters of the north, Harald Hardrada would voice his assertion. In Norway, he had ascended to sole kingship upon the death of his nephew Magnus the Good, whom he believed Edward had wrongfully supplanted. The legacy of sacred oaths and blood ties bolstered his claim, a mantle he saw as rightfully his by the ancient laws of a man's word. Across the Channel, William the Duke of Normandy staked his own claim, fortified by Edward's purported designation and a solemn oath of support from Harald Godwinson himself. The ties between Normandy and England lent weight to his bid, further complicating an already contentious succession. As the Witan deliberated, torn between tradition and the demands of a troubled kingdom, the echoes of Viking kings reshaped the calculus of succession. The boyish annoyance of Edgar stood against the seasoned leadership of Harald Godwinson, a celebrated figure himself. Ultimately, on the dawn following Edward's burial, the Witan, comprising of lords and bishops alike, convened. In a pivotal moment that would echo through the annals of history, they set aside the structures of lineage, choosing instead the resolute leadership of Harald Godwinson. With unanimous consent, Godwinson was crowned the King of England by the Archbishop of York, solidifying his claim amid a sea of challenges and ambitions. However, Godwinson's brother Tostig, who had been the Earl of Northumbria, was exiled from England, and his resentment led him to treason, to rise against his fellow countrymen and his own brother, who was now the King of England. In Harald Hardrada's saga, Tostig was described as a clever man and a great warrior. Earl Tostig would turn his gaze northward and made his way to Norway, seeking an audience with King Harald, who held court in Viken at the time. The Earl would tell Harald of his lost lands and dominions, but Harald, known for his sharp wit and decisive demeanour, responded cautiously. He voiced the Northmen's reluctance towards a campaign in England, weary of placing English chiefs over them. "People say," he remarked, "the English cannot be trusted." Undeterred, Earl Tostig pressed on, questioning Harald about Magnus's claim to England, passed down through agreements after Harthacnut's death. Harald, reflecting on his own aspirations and the historical complexities, countered with Denmark's defiance against Norwegian rule, asserting their prowess in conflict with Tostig's kin. Tostig, however, ever persistent, challenged Harald's hesitance towards England, despite his formidable reputation in warfare. "All it takes," he asserted, "is your name to rally England's principal men to our cause. Your unmatched valour is renowned across these northern lands. Why not seize England now, when it's ripe for the taking?" Harald, weighing the Earl's words with keen insight, acknowledged the truth within them. With a shared ambition for dominion and a desire to expand his realm, Harald deliberated with Tostig at length, eventually committing to a summer expedition to England. He swiftly dispatched messengers across Norway, summoning half of the able-bodied men to arms, stirring speculation and anticipation throughout his realm. The stories of Harald's past conquests made many believe that England would be his next triumph. The stage was set for a bold venture that would test Harald Hardrada's mettle and shape the fate of England and its throne. In the stirring days of March or April in 1066, Hardrada marshalled his fleet along the rugged shores of Norway. Before setting sail, he ensured his legacy by proclaiming his son Magnus as the rightful king of their homeland. Their voyage was marked by conquest and allegiance, first anchoring at the islands of Shetland and Orkney, where his loyal subjects rallied to his cause. He then made his way to Scotland, where the rugged Scots under Malcolm III awaited. Here, Harold met with Tostig Godwinson, his steadfast ally with his own band of Northumbrian warriors and seasoned mercenaries. Malcolm III also provided 2,000 Scottish soldiers. Hardrada's invasion of England surged like a tempest from the North Sea, his longships cutting through the waters with ominous purpose. Coastal villages trembled as his warriors descended, thirsting for plunder and glory. At Scarborough, where the defiant English first dared defy him, Hardrada's response was swift and merciless. The town burned under a rain of flaming arrows, its wooden walls crackling and collapsing in a blaze. The screams of the inhabitants echoed across the lands, a dire warning to all who would resist. With each conquest, the Norwegians grew bolder, their appetite for wealth and conquest swelling. Word of the invasion would soon reach the ears of Morcar, the Earl of Northumbria, and Edwin, the Earl of Mercia, who rallied their forces to confront the Norse menace. At Fulford, just south of York, the two sides met in an epic battle. Harold's army, a formidable force of 10,000 warriors, seasoned in countless battles, stood ready to crush any who dare oppose them. The English, though outnumbered, fought with a grim determination. Edwin had wisely chosen the battlefield, using the natural barriers of the River Ouse and the swampy fordland to anchor their fleets. Yet these advantages proved double-edged. The higher ground favoured Hardrada's strategic vision, giving him a clear view of the unfolding slaughter. As the battle commenced, the English surged forward, their lines stretching thin to secure their vulnerable flanks. Morcar's troops surged against the Norwegian lines, driving them back into the treacherous marshlands. Initial gains raised their hopes, but Harold swiftly brought his seasoned warriors into play, turning the tide with brutal efficiency. Harold's tactical mastery became evident as he reinforced his centre and exploited weaknesses in the English lines. Wave after wave of Norsemen crashed into the English shield wall, their ferocity unmatched. Edwin's troops, isolated on the riverbank, fought desperately but were slowly driven back, forced to retreat towards the safety of York. Hour by hour, the battle raged on, the fields turning red with Saxon blood. Norwegian reinforcements continued to arrive, encircling the Anglo-Saxon defenders and sealing their fate. Despite valiant efforts, the English were overwhelmed by sheer force and strategy. Morcar and Edwin, though escaping the battle, could only watch as their forces crumbled under Harald Hardrada's relentless assault. York, sensing the inevitable, surrendered under solemn promises of sparing the city from further devastation. Tostig's influence, eager to preserve his capital, ensured the terms were honoured. The defeated English retreated, leaving the Norwegians to gather hostages and consolidate their hold on the region. The Battle of Fulford marked a grim chapter in England's history, and Harald Hardrada's Viking horde had just taken the ancient city of York, a grim reminder to the Northumbrians of Viking power, as the ancient city was captured 200 years prior by the sons of Ragnar. Harold Godwinson, the newly crowned King of England, would rush north with the full might of his army, bolstered by his brothers Gurth and Leofwine, the Earls of Kent and East Anglia. He would catch Harald Hardrada's Viking horde by surprise. So sudden did Godwinson muster his forces to face the legendary Viking king. As the dawn of battle approached, a lone figure rode forth from the mist-shrouded ranks of the Saxons, a harbinger of death and defiance, his identity concealed beneath a black cloak. He approached Harald Hardrada and Tostig with a chilling proposition. No name escaped his lips, but his words cut through the cold morning air like a blade. To Tostig, he offered the return of his lost earldom if he would betray Hardrada. In response, Tostig, ever the opportunist, demanded to know what his brother the English king would offer in return for such treachery. The rider's reply was a grim prophecy, wrapped in the cloak of a challenge. 7 feet of English ground, for he is taller than other men. With these words, the rider vanished back into the swirling mists, leaving behind a stunned silence among the Norsemen. Hardrada, known for his warrior's heart, was struck by the audacity of the message. Turning to Tostig, he demanded to know the identity of the fearless messenger. Tostig's reply fell like a stone into a pool of silence. He said it was Harold Godwinson, the King of England himself. Swiftly after this meeting, the English army descended upon the Norwegians with a fury and would begin to massacre Hardrada's forces. Caught off guard and by surprise, the Norse warriors scrambled to meet the sudden onslaught. The advance of the English was momentarily stalled by the narrow passage of a bridge. It was here where a lone Norwegian warrior armed with a Dane-axe and driven by a berserker fury would hold off the entirety of the English army. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as though this Norseman might defy the march of the English, but fate intervened. After the berserker had slain 40 Englishmen, an English soldier unseen beneath the bridge thrust his spear upward through the wooden planks, finding its mark in the groin of the berserk, bringing him to his knees, allowing him to be slain. Godwinson's army would then surge across the bridge. A relentless tide of warriors locked shields and charged. They formed a formidable line just short of the Norse army, their collective roar echoing across the battlefield. The battle quickly spread far beyond the confines of the bridge, transforming the landscape into an area of death and valour. For hours the clash raged on, steel meeting steel. The Norsemen and their decision to forsake their armour proved to be a fatal misstep, as they found themselves increasingly at a disadvantage. The English forces, relentless and unyielding, pressed their attack with ferocity. Slowly but surely, they fragmented the once impenetrable Norse shield wall, exploiting every weakness until it shattered. Tostig Godwinson, the traitor to the English, was slain in the carnage, as were many Norse earls and formidable warriors. In the heart of this chaos, Harald Hardrada stood as a beacon of raw power. His hands gripped his longsword with unwavering strength, carving a path through the enemy with each swing. It is said that he entered the legendary state of the berserker, his fury transcending human limits. In this trance-like rage, the 50-year-old veteran of 100 battles became a whirlwind of death, felling foe after foe with savage precision, a god on the battlefield. According to Harald's saga, this is what transpired. King Harald Sigurdsson saw this. He went into the fray where the greatest crash of weapons was, and there was a sharp conflict, in which many people fell on both sides. King Harald then was in a rage, and ran out in front of the array, and hewed down with both hands, so that neither helmet nor armour could withstand him, and all who were nearest gave way before him. It was then very near with the English that they had taken to flight. King Harald Sigurdsson was hit by an arrow in the windpipe, and that was his death wound. The Icelandic historian and poet Snorri Sturluson also wrote of Harald's death. The Saxons ran away from him. An arrow hit him in the chin, but he pulled it out, Another arrow hit him in the throat. Then he sat down. A friend asked him if he was hurt. Harald said, "It's just a small arrow, but it's doing its job." And then he died. And so, the most seasoned warrior on the battlefield, Harald Hardrada, the Viking king of Norway, a man whose exploits spanned the known world, and whose life was woven from the very fabric of legend, met his end in the blood-soaked plains of Stamford Bridge, at 50 years of age, with a legacy forged in countless battles. He bled out upon the cold English soil. The Thunderbolt of the North, a name that struck fear into the hearts of men, died as he had lived, by the sword. His final breath marked the end of an era, the twilight of the Viking Age. With his passing, the once feared Norse marauders transformed into the echoes of myth, their sagas and deeds becoming the timeless stuff of legend. The world shifted that day, the death of a legend heralding the dawn of a new age. I would like to give a huge thank you to all of my members. Your contribution is valuable to the continuation of the channel, and I appreciate you all immensely. A special thank you to John Sides. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you all next week for another History Profile.